Number 1. The Upanishads. Consciousness as Brahman. Welcome. In the quiet stillness that surrounds these words, I invite you to begin a journey with me. This is not a journey to a physical place, but an exploration into the very heart of experience, into the most intimate and yet most elusive mystery of our existence, the nature of consciousness itself. What is this silent, knowing presence that is aware of this voice, aware of the room around you, of the thoughts and feelings that drift through your mind? For millennia, this question has been the quiet hum beneath all human endeavor, prompting sages, philosophers, and scientists to turn their gaze away from the outer world and into the vast inner cosmos of the mind. Our journey begins there, in the mists of ancient history, in the forest hermitages of India more than 2,500 years ago. It begins with a collection of sacred, mystical texts known as the Upanishads. The very word Upanishad translates to sitting down near, painting a vivid picture of a student sitting devotedly at the feet of a master, ready to receive a teaching not of facts or doctrines, but of profound, transformative insight. These ancient sages were the world's first true psychologists, the original explorers of inner space. Through deep, sustained meditation and fearless self-inquiry, they sought to discover the ultimate ground of being, the fundamental reality that underlies everything. And what they discovered, they called Brahman. Brahman, they taught, is the ultimate, singular, unchanging reality of the universe. It is not a personal God residing in a distant heaven, but the very fabric and substance of existence itself. It is the formless, infinite, and silent source from which all forms arise and to which all forms return. Imagine the vast, boundless ocean. The waves, the currents, the ripples, the foam, and the spray all appear to be separate and individual things, each with its own momentary life and character. But in truth, they are all nothing but the dynamic expression of the one single ocean. Brahman is this ocean, the unmanifested, unified essence of all that is. The entire cosmos, in all its breathtaking diversity, is seen as a manifestation of this one, all-pervading consciousness. But the sages did not stop their inquiry with the vastness of the outer world. They turned their focus from the macrocosm of the universe to the microcosm within the human heart. And here, within each individual, they found a corresponding principle, an inner light of pure awareness, which they called the Atman. The Atman is the individual self, the silent, immovable witness that observes all our experiences, our thoughts, our emotions, our sensations, our memories. It is the innermost essence of who you are, the pure subjectivity that exists beyond your name, your body, your personality, or your personal history. It is the unchanging center in the midst of life's constant change. And here, at the very heart of the Upanishads, lies their most profound and revolutionary declaration. After exploring the ultimate reality of the universe, Brahman, and the innermost reality of the self, Atman, the sages declared that these two, which seem so different, are not separate at all. They are, in fact, one and the same. The celebrated Sanskrit phrase from these texts, Tat Twam Asi, powerfully conveys this truth. You are that. This teaching is a direct statement that your individual consciousness, your Atman, is not merely a drop of water from the cosmic ocean of Brahman. It is the entire ocean. The deeply ingrained feeling of being a separate, isolated self is considered a profound illusion, a cosmic trick of the mind, which they named Maya. The purpose of life for these ancient minds was not to learn this as a fact, but to realize it as a direct, living experience. This was liberation, or moksha, a state of unshakable peace and freedom from the fundamental fear that comes from feeling like a small, vulnerable fragment in a vast universe. And so, our journey begins here, grounded in this foundational vision of consciousness as a single, unified, eternal, and all-encompassing reality. From this ancient perspective of a changeless, universal self, we will now turn our attention to another great sage of India, who also looked deep within, but came to a startlingly different conclusion, seeing consciousness not as a static ocean of being, but a dynamic and ever-changing flow, a selfless stream where no permanent entity could ever be found. Number 2. Buddha. Consciousness as flow, not self. We leave the serene and timeless shores of the one, unchanging ocean of Brahman and find ourselves now standing by the banks of a great and powerful river, a river in perpetual motion. Our guide for this next step of the journey is Siddhartha Gautama, a prince who lived in the 6th century BCE and who became known as the Buddha, meaning the awakened one. His entire spiritual quest began not with a metaphysical question about the ultimate nature of reality, but with a deeply personal and compassionate observation of the human condition. He saw that all beings, regardless of their station in life, experienced a fundamental dissatisfaction, a sense of unease and suffering he called dukkha. He saw that life was marked by impermanence, that everything we cherish, our youth, our health, our loved ones, our very lives, is subject to change and loss. His quest was to understand the root cause of this universal suffering and to find the path to its complete cessation. Like the sages of the Upanishads before him, he turned his attention inward, using meditation to achieve extraordinary levels of mental clarity and focus. He looked deep inside for that permanent, essential self, the Atman, that the Upanishads spoke of. But in a radical departure, he found that the closer and more precisely he looked, the more it eluded him. He concluded that no such solid, singular, unchanging entity exists. This core insight, which forms the bedrock of all Buddhist thought, is known as anatta, or not self. From this perspective, what we call the self is not a noun, but a verb. It is not a thing, but a process. It is not a static observer watching the world go by, but an ever-changing, interdependent stream of events. The Buddha meticulously analyzed the human experience, breaking it down into 5 interconnected processes, which he called the 5 aggregates or skandhas. These are the components that, when bundled together, create the powerful illusion of a solid self. The first is form, our physical body. The second is feeling, the raw sensations of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral that arise from contact with the world. The third is perception, the mind's function of recognizing and labeling what is sensed. The fourth is mental formations. This is a vast category that includes all our thoughts, intentions, emotions, habits, and volitions. And the fifth, crucially, is consciousness. Here, consciousness is not the grand stage upon which everything happens. Instead, it is simply the bare awareness of the other 4 aggregates. It arises moment by moment, in dependence on them. Consciousness of sight arises when an eye meets a form. Consciousness of sound arises when an ear meets a vibration. It is not a continuous light, but a rapid succession of individual sparks, each one igniting and dying in an instant, giving rise to the next. The self we believe in is a story created by the mind, linking these disconnected moments together. The source of our suffering, the Buddha taught, comes from our ignorance of this truth. We desperately cling to the components of this flow, identifying with our bodies, our feelings, and our thoughts, trying to build a solid and lasting identity out of these transient phenomena. This clinging, this grasping onto what is fundamentally impermanent, is the root of all our anxieties. The path to liberation, or nirvana, is therefore not to find a true self, but to see through the illusion of any self at all. It is to sit by the bank of this inner river of experience and to watch the ceaseless flow with mindful, non-judgmental awareness. As we now journey westward to ancient Greece, we will encounter a radically different vision, one that rejects this selfless flow and instead builds an eternal home for the soul in a perfect and unchanging world of ideas. Number 3. Plato, the soul and the realm of forms. From the ever-shifting river of Buddhist thought, where the self dissolves into a fleeting process, we now travel across continents and centuries to the sun-drenched city of Athens, to the heart of ancient Greece. Here, we encounter a thinker for whom consciousness was the very opposite of impermanent. We meet Plato, a devoted student of Socrates, who would construct an entire metaphysical architecture to explain the world, an architecture that places the human soul at its very center. For Plato, the world that we perceive with our five senses, the world of change, birth, death, and decay that so concerned the Buddha, was not the real world at all. He saw it as a world of shadows, a dim, flickering, and imperfect copy of a higher, more real, and eternal dimension of existence. This ultimate reality he called the realm of forms. This was a transcendent, non-physical plane inhabited by the perfect and unchanging blueprints or archetypes of everything that exists in our material world. In this higher realm, there exists a perfect form of a tree, from which all earthly trees are mere copies. There is a perfect form of justice, of which all our human laws are pale imitations. There is a perfect form of beauty itself, which is the source of all beautiful things we encounter. What, then, is consciousness in this grand two-tiered cosmos? For Plato, our consciousness is not something that arises from the brain or the body. It is the activity of our immortal soul. He taught that before our soul was incarnated into a physical body, it dwelt in this luminous realm of forms. There, it had direct and unmediated knowledge of these perfect ideas. It knew beauty itself, justice itself, and truth itself. The trauma of birth, the shock of being imprisoned in a physical body, caused the soul to forget this profound, innate knowledge. Therefore, what we call learning in this life is not the acquisition of new information from the outside world. It is a process of remembering what our soul already knows, a process he famously called amnesis. When we see a beautiful sunset or hear a beautiful piece of music, our soul is sparked into a faint recollection of the perfect form of beauty it once knew. When we grasp a mathematical theorem, our soul is remembering the perfect and eternal form of that truth. Our physical senses merely act as triggers for these deep, hidden memories. To explain the conflicts and complexities of our inner life, Plato envisioned the soul as being composed of three distinct parts. He used the powerful analogy of a charioteer managing two winged horses. The charioteer represents the rational soul, located in the head. This is the seat of reason, our true consciousness, the part of us that is divine and immortal. Its task is to guide the chariot. One horse is noble and spirited, representing our emotions, like courage, ambition, and honor, residing in the chest. The other horse is wild and unruly, representing our appetites, our physical desires for food, drink, and pleasure, located in the gut. A life of wisdom and virtue consists in the rational charioteer skillfully guiding these two powerful horses, keeping them in harmony and directing them upward, back towards the heavenly realm of forms. For Plato, consciousness is a fallen divinity, a fragment of eternity longing to return home. It was his most gifted student, however, who would take this lofty vision of the soul and anchor it firmly back into the biological realities of the living world. Number 4. Aristotle, Nous, and the Thinking Being. We now move from the teacher to the student, from Plato's transcendent and otherworldly realm of forms to the more grounded, empirical, and biological world of his most brilliant pupil, Aristotle. While Plato was a mathematician and a visionary who looked to the heavens for truth, Aristotle was a biologist and a meticulous observer who looked to the world around him. He believed that to understand anything, including consciousness, You must study it as it exists in nature. Aristotle began by rejecting Plato's core idea of a separate realm of forms. For him, the form of a thing was not some distant blueprint, but its essential nature. What makes it the kind of thing that it is, and this form could not be separated from its matter. He used the elegant analogy of a signet ring pressing a shape into a piece of wax. The shape and the wax are inextricably linked. You cannot have one without the other. In the same way, the soul and the body are two sides of the same coin. The soul, for Aristotle, is the form of a living body. It is the principle of life itself, the set of capacities and functions that makes a collection of flesh and bone a single, living, functioning organism. It is what makes a body alive. To explain the diversity of life, he proposed a hierarchy of souls, each level building upon the last. Plants, he said, possess a vegetative soul, which is responsible for the basic functions of growth, nutrition, and reproduction. Animals have a sensitive soul, which includes all the vegetative functions but adds the crucial capacities for perception, desire, and movement. They can sense the world and move towards what they want. But humans, and humans alone, possess a rational soul. This is the highest level, and it encompasses all the lower functions but adds the unique and defining capacity for thought, reason, and intellect. This is the seat of human consciousness. Within this rational soul, Aristotle made a further crucial distinction that has puzzled and fascinated philosophers for centuries. He spoke of a passive intellect and an active intellect. The passive intellect is like a blank slate, a potential. It receives the impressions from our senses, the specific images, sounds, and feelings of the world. But this raw sensory data is not yet knowledge. It is the active intellect, which he called nous, that illuminates this data. Nous is the power that abstracts the universal principles from our particular experiences. If Plato's soul remembered the perfect form of treeness, Aristotle's nous perceives many individual trees through the senses and then abstracts the universal concept of what makes a tree a tree. It finds the universal within the particular. This active intellect, this nous, was the highest and most mysterious part of consciousness for Aristotle. He described it in almost mystical terms, as something pure, unmixed, separate from the body, and immortal. He famously wrote that it seems to come from outside. While the rest of the soul, being the form of the body, perishes with the body, Aristotle left the door open for this pure power of thought to be eternal. The purpose of human life for him was to live in accordance with this highest faculty, to pursue a life of reason and contemplation which leads to a state of profound human flourishing he called eudaimonia. It was this divine spark of active intellect that a later philosopher would seize upon, expanding it into a magnificent, cascading vision of cosmic consciousness. Number 5. Plotinus, the one and the emanation of mind. Leaving the structured and empirical world of Aristotle, our journey now flows into a more mystical and spiritual stream of thought that emerged centuries later in the Roman Empire. We arrive to meet Plotinus, a philosopher who took the foundational ideas of Plato, integrated elements of Aristotle, and synthesized them into a grand, comprehensive spiritual system that would become known as Neoplatonism. He sought nothing less than a grand unified theory of everything, a system that could explain the origin of the universe, the nature of consciousness, and a clear path for the human soul to return to its ultimate source. At the absolute pinnacle of Plotinus's system is a single, transcendent principle he called the One. The One is utterly simple, perfect, and infinite. It is so completely unified and beyond all categorization that you cannot even say that it exists in the way that other things exist, because existence implies a limitation. It is beyond all concepts, all language, and all thought. You cannot say what the One is, only what it is not. The One is so perfect and so overflowing with generative power that, like a sun that cannot help but radiate light, or a spring that cannot help but overflow, it emanates reality from itself in a series of cascading levels without ever diminishing its own perfection or unity. The very first and highest emanation from the One is what Plotinus called nous, which can be translated as divine mind or intellect. This is the realm of pure being and pure thought, and it is here that we find the equivalent of Plato's realm of forms. Nous contains all the perfect archetypes of everything that could possibly exist, not as separate ideas, but as a single, unified, living intelligence. It is pure thought, thinking itself in its totality. But because it is a step away from the absolute unity of the One, it contains the first duality, the distinction between the thinker and what is being thought. From this divine mind, a second level emanates, the world soul, or psyche. The world soul is less unified than nous. It is the animating principle of the entire physical universe. It looks upward towards nous and contemplates the perfect forms, and from that contemplation, it looks downward and projects those forms into the world of time and space, creating order, life, and beauty in the material cosmos. Our individual souls, our personal centers of consciousness, are parts of this greater world soul. We are like rays of light that have traveled far from their ultimate source in the One. Because of this, our consciousness has a dual nature. In our higher aspect, our own intellect, we are connected to the universal nous and can access the realm of eternal truths. But in our lower aspect, we are entangled with the physical body and the distracting world of the senses, a realm of division, change, and forgetfulness. For Plotinus, the human drama is the story of this descended consciousness. We have forgotten our divine origin. We have become captivated by the shadows on the wall of the cave, identifying with our bodies and our earthly passions. The spiritual path, therefore, is a journey inward and upward. It is the process of turning our awareness away from the fragmentation of the outer world and directing it back towards our source, a journey of purification and ascent. Through philosophical discipline and deep contemplation, we can climb this ladder of being from sensory awareness to the level of our soul, then to the luminous realm of nous, and finally, in a rare, ecstatic moment of mystical union, we can experience a fleeting, wordless return to the silent, ineffable presence of the One. This powerful vision of cosmic hierarchy and an inner journey home would profoundly shape the spiritual landscape for the next 1,000 years, providing a vital bridge between classical philosophy and the great monotheistic religions that followed. Number 6. Augustine, Divine Light and Inner Awareness. Our journey now carries us forward from the philosophical mysticism of Plotinus directly into the heart of early Christian thought, where these powerful classical ideas were absorbed, transformed, and baptized into a new and deeply personal faith. Here we meet Aurelius Augustine, a towering figure of Western civilization, a bishop and theologian whose own dramatic life story, a journey from a restless life of sensual indulgence and intellectual pride to a profound spiritual conversion, became the very model for the Western understanding of the self. For Augustine, the quest to understand consciousness was utterly inseparable from the quest for God. He took the abstract and impersonal One of Plotinus and identified it with the personal, loving, and all-powerful God of the Christian Bible. This single move changed everything. The inner journey was no longer just a philosophical ascent toward an abstract principle. It was the poignant and dramatic return of a lost child to their loving Creator. Augustine famously began his great autobiography, The Confessions, with the words, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." This profound restlessness, this deep inner yearning, is the very engine of consciousness for him. He passionately urged his readers to turn inward. He wrote, "Do not go abroad. Return within yourself. In the inward man dwells the truth. He believed that ultimate truth was not to be found in the distracting and deceptive outer world of the senses, but in the private internal space of the mind, which he called the interior homo, the inner man. It is within this sacred internal space that the drama of salvation unfolds. To explain how we come to know truth, Augustine adopted and Christianized the Platonic idea of illumination. Just as the physical sun shines its light upon the world, allowing our physical eyes to see, God shines a divine light directly into our minds. This divine light illuminates our intellect, our consciousness, allowing our inner eye to see and understand eternal and unchanging truths, the truths of mathematics, logic, and morality. When we grasp a timeless principle, it is not simply our own intellect at work, it is God's divine light making that knowledge possible within our awareness. Our consciousness is a space that is perpetually lit by a presence greater than ourselves. A pivotal element of Augustine's understanding of the self is the faculty of memory. In his Confessions, he marvels at the vast and mysterious palaces of memory, a great storehouse where all our experiences, knowledge, and skills are held. But for Augustine, memory was far more than just a passive repository of the past. It is the very faculty that weaves together the thread of our identity, giving us a sense of continuity through time. And most importantly, it is in the depths of our memory that we can find the traces of God. Even if we have forgotten God, the memory of a deep longing for perfect happiness, for a truth that never changes, remains within us, acting as an inner compass perpetually pointing us back home. To truly know oneself, for Augustine, is to understand that one's very existence and one's ability to be conscious are moment-to-moment gifts from a loving creator. He even saw the mind as having a threefold structure: memory, understanding, and will, which he viewed as a beautiful inner reflection of the Holy Trinity. Augustine thus created a deeply psychological and personal model of consciousness, one where introspection is a form of prayer, and self-knowledge is the essential path to salvation. And it was this method of discovering certainty within the self that would be echoed centuries later in a famous thought experiment from a very different tradition. Number 7. Avicenna, the floating man, and self-awareness. We now travel from the Christian West to the flourishing Islamic Golden Age, a period of immense intellectual, scientific, and cultural progress. Here we encounter a towering Persian polymath known in the West as Avicenna, a brilliant physician whose medical encyclopedia would be a standard text in Europe for centuries. Avicenna was also a profound philosopher who sought to synthesize the rigorous logical framework of Aristotle with his own deeply insightful reflections on the nature of the soul and consciousness. He was intensely interested in getting to the absolute core of what it means to be aware, to strip away all external and contingent factors to find the bedrock of selfhood. To achieve this, Avicenna devised one of history's most elegant and powerful thought experiments, an idea that remarkably predates a similar and more famous argument by Descartes by over 600 years. He called it the floating man argument. He asks us to conduct an experiment in our imagination. Imagine a person who was created by God all at once, fully formed and adult, but under very specific conditions. This person is created suspended in a void, in mid-air, so they feel no pressure or gravity. Their limbs are bound in such a way that they cannot touch anything, not even their own body. They are blindfolded, so they can see nothing. The environment is perfectly quiet and still, so they hear nothing. They have absolutely no sensory input from the external world. Furthermore, this person has no memories of a past life, no learned concepts or language. They are a pure mind, devoid of all experience. Avicenna then poses the crucial question: would this person, the floating man, be aware of anything at all? His answer is an emphatic and resounding yes. This floating man, he argues,
would be absolutely and unshakably certain of one thing and one thing only: his own existence. He would know, with direct and immediate intuition, that he is. He might not know what he is. He wouldn't know he has a body, or a heart, or a brain. He wouldn't know that a world exists outside of himself. But the core awareness of his own being, the raw fact of his own selfhood, would be undeniably present to him. With this single, powerful argument, Avicenna aimed to prove several profound points. First, he demonstrated that self-awareness, or consciousness, is primary and innate. It does not depend on our senses or our experience of the external world. It is a fundamental given of our existence. It comes first. Second, he argued that this self-awareness is also independent of the body. Since the floating man can be aware of his self without being aware of possessing a body, the self, which he identified with the rational soul, must be a non-physical, immaterial substance, distinct and separable from the physical frame. The soul does not need the body to be aware of its own existence. It is a fundamental, indivisible spiritual entity. For Avicenna, consciousness is this immediate, direct, and private intuition of one's own being. You do not need to reason your way to it or prove it with external evidence. You simply know it directly. The soul is like an eye that sees itself without needing a mirror. This powerful idea, that one can use a method of radical doubt to arrive at the unshakable certainty of one's own conscious existence, would echo down the centuries, finding its most famous expression in the work of a French philosopher who would make it the very cornerstone of an entirely new philosophical era.
Number 8. Descartes. I think, therefore I am. Our journey now brings us to the dawn of the modern era, a time of profound intellectual and social upheaval. The old certainties of the medieval world, which had stood for 1,000 years, were crumbling under the weight of the new science of Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton. It is in this climate of radical doubt that we meet the French philosopher, mathematician, and scientist René Descartes. Deeply troubled by this uncertainty, Descartes set himself a monumental task: to demolish the entire edifice of old knowledge and to build a new and absolutely certain foundation for all science and philosophy, a foundation that could withstand any possible skeptical attack. His chosen tool for this demolition was the method of radical doubt. He decided that he would systematically doubt everything he had ever believed, accepting nothing as true until he found a single indubitable truth upon which to build. He began with the evidence of his senses. He noted that his senses often deceived him. A stick in water looks bent, a distant tower can appear round when it is square, and we can mistake one person for another. If his senses could deceive him sometimes, he reasoned, perhaps they are deceiving him all the time. He then cast doubt on the existence of the entire physical world, including his own body. He considered the possibility that he might be dreaming. He reflected that there are no certain signs to distinguish waking life from a vivid dream. For all he knew, his entire life experience could be an elaborate and fantastical illusion. Not satisfied, he took his doubt to its absolute extreme. He imagined that there might exist a powerful and malicious demon, an evil genius, whose sole purpose was to deceive him about absolutely everything. Perhaps this demon was tricking him into believing that he had a body when he had none, or that 2 + 2 = 4 when it does not. In this whirlwind of methodical skepticism, as the reality of his body, his senses, and the entire world dissolved into profound uncertainty, Descartes found his anchor. He realized that even if he was being deceived by an all-powerful demon, he had to exist in order to be deceived. Even if he was dreaming, he had to exist in order to dream. The very act of doubting his own existence was itself the one thing that proved he existed. From this singular, brilliant insight, he formulated one of the most famous phrases in all of philosophy: cogito ergo sum.
I think, therefore I am. For Descartes, the word thinking encompassed a very broad range of activities. It included doubting, understanding, affirming, denying, willing, refusing, imagining, and even the experience of sensory perceptions. It was, in short, everything that we would today call consciousness. The I that is proven to exist is a res cogiton, a thinking thing. This was his indestructible foundation, the undeniable reality of his own conscious mind. He then argued that this thinking thing, this non-physical mind, was a completely different kind of substance from the physical body, which he called res extensa, or extended thing. This created the famous mind-body dualism that has haunted Western philosophy ever since. For Descartes, consciousness is the very essence of the self. It is a private, internal theater where our thoughts and feelings play out, a reality more certain than the chair you are sitting on or the ground beneath your feet. This powerful vision of the self as a personal, internal, thinking being marks a major shift in our journey, a smooth transition towards understanding consciousness not just as a metaphysical entity, but as the very source of our personal identity over time.
Number 9. John Locke. Consciousness as personal identity. From the foundational certainty of Descartes' I think, therefore I am, which established the self as a conscious, thinking thing, we now move to a more practical and psychological question that naturally follows. If the self is a thinking thing, what makes it the same thinking thing from one moment to the next, from childhood to old age? Our guide for this crucial inquiry is the great English philosopher John Locke, a key figure in the Age of Enlightenment. Locke was an empiricist, meaning he believed that all our knowledge originates from experience. He famously rejected the idea of innate truths, arguing instead that the mind at birth is a tabula rasa, a blank slate, waiting to be written upon by the pen of sensory experience. This fundamental belief meant that he could not rely on the notion of an unchanging, immortal soul substance to ground our identity, as Descartes did. An immaterial soul, after all, is something we can never observe or experience. For Locke, the question of personal identity was not just a philosophical puzzle, it was a forensic concept with profound real-world moral and legal implications. What makes a person today responsible for an action they committed yesterday? What connects the old retired general to the young, brave soldier he once was? His answer was radical and shifted the conversation entirely. Personal identity, he argued, is not found in the substance of the body, which changes constantly, nor in the substance of the soul, which is unknowable. Instead, Locke located personal identity solely in the realm of consciousness itself. Specifically, he defined it as the continuity of memory. You are the same person you were yesterday because you are conscious of and can remember the thoughts, actions, and experiences of that person. It is this capacity for consciousness to be extended backwards in time that creates the self. To illustrate this point with startling clarity, he proposed a famous thought experiment. Imagine, he said, that the soul of a prince, carrying with it all the consciousness and memories of the prince's past life, were to enter and animate the body of a cobbler. To the outside world, everyone would see the body of the cobbler and treat him as such. But to the person himself, inside that body, he would be the prince. He would be aware of the prince's memories, not the cobbler's. Locke argues forcefully that this person would be morally and legally accountable for the prince's past actions, not the cobbler's, because personal identity follows consciousness and memory, not the body or the soul. In this view, the self is a self-reflective consciousness. It is the awareness of being aware, the ability to consider oneself as oneself, the same thinking thing in different times and places. This consciousness is what makes you a person, an intelligent, thinking being who can reason, reflect, and be held responsible for your actions. This was a profound shift.
It moved the definition of self away from a metaphysical substance and into the realm of psychology. However, this theory presents its own deep challenges. What if you genuinely forget an action you committed? Were you not the person who performed that act? What about periods of dreamless sleep or amnesia, where consciousness ceases? Locke's theory implies that our identity might be fragmented or could flicker in and out of existence. This powerful reliance on memory as the thread of identity invited a devastating critique from the next great empiricist on our journey, a philosopher who would look for this continuous thread of consciousness and find that it simply wasn't there.
Number 10. David Hume, The Bundle of Perceptions. We now take the fragile thread of memory that John Locke used to stitch together our personal identity and place it in the hands of the deeply skeptical and profoundly insightful Scottish philosopher David Hume. Pushing Locke's empiricism to its absolute logical conclusion, Hume set out to investigate the nature of the self with a new level of intellectual rigor and honesty. His guiding principle was simple and uncompromising. Every meaningful idea must be traceable back to a specific, original sensory impression. If we hold a concept in our minds, like justice, causality, or indeed self, we must be able to point to the raw data of experience from which it came. So, with this principle as his lantern, Hume turned his attention inward, practicing a form of radical introspection. He went looking for this self. He tried to catch it, to observe it directly as a continuous and stable entity that supposedly underlies all his experiences. But no matter how hard he looked, and no matter how closely he examined the contents of his own mind, he could not find it. He never encountered a constant, single, unified impression of self. Instead, what he found was something far more chaotic, fleeting, and dynamic. He famously reported his findings with startling clarity. For my part, when I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception or other, of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. I can never catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception. He noted that when all his perceptions were removed for a time, as in sound sleep, for that duration he was insensible of himself and could truly be said not to exist. From this direct empirical investigation, Hume drew a conclusion that was as logical as it was shocking. The self, that solid, enduring core of our being that we take for granted every moment of our lives, does not actually exist as a single entity. It is an illusion. What we call consciousness, or the self, is, in his famous words, nothing but a bundle or collection of different perceptions, which succeed each other with an inconceivable rapidity and are in a perpetual flux and movement. He compared the mind to a kind of theater, where these various perceptions successfully make their appearance. They pass, repass, glide away, and mingle in an infinite variety of postures and situations. But, he crucially adds, we must not be misled by the metaphor. The mind is not a physical theater, there is no stage. And, more importantly, there is no owner of the theater, no single stable audience member watching the show. There is only the succession of perceptions itself. So why do we have such a powerful and unshakable feeling of being a continuous self? Hume argued it is a fiction, a story created by the human mind out of habit. Our imagination creates a sense of identity because our perceptions are often linked by the principles of resemblance and causation. One thought leads to another, one memory connects to the next, and we invent the idea of a single I that is having all these experiences to make sense of the flow. In a way that strikingly echoes the Buddhist concept of anatta, Hume had deconstructed the Western ego, leaving us with a crisis. If there is no enduring self, what becomes of morality, responsibility, and reason? Hume's skepticism had shattered the very foundations of identity, leaving a void that the next thinker on our journey would dedicate his entire life to trying to fill. Number 11. Leibniz, The monad and inner clarity. In the profound void left by David Hume's skepticism, where the self dissolves into a fleeting and disconnected bundle of perceptions, our journey now seeks a new principle of unity. We turn to the brilliant German philosopher, mathematician, and inventor Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a towering intellect of the Enlightenment, who saw the universe not as a chaotic stream, but as a place of profound and perfect harmony. While Hume looked into his mind and found only a succession of events, Leibniz looked at the fundamental nature of reality and saw it as being composed of an infinite number of individual, indivisible, and living centers of force, which he called monads. These monads are the ultimate simple substances of the universe, the true atoms of nature. They are not physical particles, but something more akin to metaphysical points of energy, or elemental souls. Each monad is a unique and self-contained universe. A crucial aspect of their nature is that they are windowless. This means they do not and cannot interact with or causally affect one another. Instead, each monad contains within itself the principle of its own actions and unfolds its entire history from within, like a pre-written scroll. If these monads are all windowless, isolated universes, how do we experience a coherent, shared world where things seem to interact? Leibniz's ingenious solution is his famous doctrine of pre-established harmony. He argued that God, whom he called the supreme monad, in an act of ultimate wisdom and foresight, created and programmed all monads from the very beginning of time to be in perfect, continuous synchrony with one another. He used the analogy of two perfect clocks. They might be placed side by side and keep perfect time with each other down to the second, giving the impression that one is causing the other, but in reality, they are simply following their own independent, pre-programmed internal mechanisms. In the same way, my soul, a dominant monad, and my body, a collection of subordinate monads, act in perfect accord, not because my thought causes my arm to move, but because God has harmonized their internal unfolding from the very start. So, what is consciousness in this universe of living, perceptive points of force? For Leibniz, every single monad possesses a degree of perception. It mirrors the entire universe from its own unique point of view. However, not all perception is conscious. He made a vital distinction between simple perception and what he called apperception. The vast majority of monads, like those that make up rocks, plants, or even the cells of our bodies, have only unconscious perceptions. He termed these petita perceptions, tiny, fleeting, and indistinct perceptions that lie below the threshold of our awareness. He gives the beautiful example of hearing the roar of the sea. The conscious sound we perceive is actually composed of the sum of countless tiny, individual sounds of each wave crashing, micro-perceptions which are themselves too small to be consciously registered. Consciousness, or what Leibniz calls apperception, is a higher-level property that belongs only to more advanced monads, like the souls of animals and especially the rational souls or minds of human beings. Apperception is perception that is accompanied by memory and the act of reflection. It is the moment when the mind not only has a perception, but is aware that it has it. It is the ability to say "I," to reflect upon one's own inner state. Therefore, our conscious mind is just the illuminated tip of a vast iceberg of unconscious mental activity. The clarity of our conscious thought emerges from a muddle of infinite, tiny, unconscious perceptions. Leibniz presents us with a universe that is alive and perceptive through and through, where consciousness is not a strange anomaly, but a higher grade of a property that exists everywhere. This vision of an underlying, divinely ordained order sets the stage perfectly for our next philosopher, who would agree that the mind imposes order, but would argue that this order comes not from God's pre-established harmony, but from the very structure of the human mind itself. Number 12. Kant. The unity behind experience. In the wake of Hume's corrosive skepticism, which had dissolved the self into a meaningless bundle of perceptions, and Leibniz's elaborate metaphysical solution of a pre-established harmony, philosophy found itself at a critical impasse. It fell to the quiet, methodical German philosopher Immanuel Kant, a man who famously claimed Hume had awakened him from his dogmatic slumber, to forge a third way, a revolutionary synthesis that would forever change our understanding of consciousness and its relationship to reality. Kant proposed what he called a Copernican revolution in philosophy, as radical as Copernicus turning the cosmos inside out. For centuries, he argued, philosophers had assumed that our minds must passively conform to the world of objects. We see a tree because the tree impresses itself upon our senses. Kant suggested we perform a thought experiment and reverse this assumption. What if, instead, the world of objects must conform to the inherent structure of our minds? He agreed with the empiricists like Hume that all our knowledge indeed begins with sensory experience. The world bombards our senses with a chaotic, formless stream of raw data, what he called a manifold of intuition. But, and this is his crucial insight, this raw data does not organize itself. The mind is not a passive blank slate or a simple container. It is an active agent that structures and synthesizes this raw data, making intelligible experience possible in the first place. Our minds come equipped with a set of built-in filters or rules that it actively imposes on all incoming information. The first and most fundamental filters are what he called the forms of intuition, space and time. We do not experience space and time as things out there in the world. Rather, they are the fundamental framework through which we are capable of experiencing anything at all. They are like the pre-installed operating system of the mind. Anything we experience must necessarily appear to us within the grid of space and the flow of time. Once the sensory data has passed through these fundamental filters, it is then processed and organized by a set of innate concepts he called the categories of the understanding. These are the core rules of thought, such as causality, substance, unity, and reality. When we see one billiard ball strike another and the second one move, we don't just see two separate events happening in sequence. Our mind actively applies the category of causality, and we perceive a necessary cause and effect relationship. This is Kant's direct and brilliant answer to Hume. The unity and order we perceive in the world is not something we passively discover out there. It is something our own minds actively construct. The world as we experience it, the world of science and common sense, what he called the phenomenal world, is a joint production of external reality and our mind's innate organizing principles. What the world is like in itself, independent of our mind's contribution, the noumenal world, we can never ever know. So where is the self in this? Kant argues that for any of this complex synthesis to occur, there must be a unified point of consciousness that is doing the synthesizing. He called this the transcendental unity of apperception. This is the I think that must, in principle, be able to accompany all of my perceptions and bind them together as my experience. It is the logical requirement for having a unified, coherent conscious life. It is the thread that strings Hume's scattered pearls of perception into a single, meaningful necklace. It is not a substance or a soul we can observe, but the supreme, active, unifying principle of consciousness itself. Kant saved the self from Hume's skepticism, but at the cost of sealing reality in itself behind an impenetrable veil, a mystery that his most famous successor would claim to have finally pierced. Number 13. Schopenhauer. Consciousness and the Will. We now find ourselves standing before the great, uncrossable chasm that Immanuel Kant placed at the center of his philosophy. The fundamental divide between the world as it appears to us, the structured, knowable world of representation, and the world as it is in itself, the mysterious and forever unknowable noumenon. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, Kant's most devoted and audacious philosophical heir, claimed to have found a secret passage across this chasm, a hidden door that Kant himself had overlooked. Schopenhauer believed he had discovered the true nature of that hidden reality, not by looking outwards with reason or the senses, but by looking inwards into the immediate lived experience of his own being. Schopenhauer wholeheartedly agreed with Kant that the world we perceive through our senses and intellect is indeed a world of representation, a world governed by the principles of space, time, and causality that Kant had identified. It is, in a sense, a dreamlike reality constructed by our minds. He famously began his magnum opus, The World as Will and Representation, by stating, "The world is my representation." But, he argued, we are not just passive spectators of this world from the outside. We have a unique, privileged access point to reality because we are not just subjects who know the world, we are also, uniquely, objects in the world. We each have a body, and when we turn our awareness to our own body, we experience it in two distinct ways simultaneously. On the one hand, we can perceive it as an object among other objects, a representation in space. But on the other hand, we know it from the inside, in a completely different and more intimate way. We feel its strivings, its impulses, its desires, its hungers, its pains, its pleasures. This inner, driving, striving force, this ceaseless and restless energy that we feel at the core of our being, is what Schopenhauer identified as the thing in itself. He gave it a name, the will, or more precisely, the will to live. Having found this key, Schopenhauer then made an audacious metaphysical leap. This inner force that we feel directly within ourselves, he declared, is the very same inner force that animates the entire universe. The force that makes a plant grow inexorably towards the sun. The force that makes a magnet turn reliably towards the pole. The force that governs the formation of a crystal and the force that pulls the planets in their orbits is the very same blind, irrational striving that we experience as our own desires. The entire phenomenal universe, in all its myriad forms, is nothing but the objectification of this single cosmic will. And what is consciousness in this powerful and deeply pessimistic vision? For Schopenhauer, our intellect, our conscious, rational mind, is a secondary and subordinate phenomenon. It is a tool, a mere lantern that the blind, all-powerful will has created for its own purposes. The will is the master, and the intellect is its servant. Our consciousness evolved merely to help the will find more complex ways to satisfy its endless cravings. This, for Schopenhauer, is the tragic source of all suffering. We are puppets of a relentless, insatiable will, and our consciousness has the unfortunate task of bearing witness to this endless, painful cycle of desire, fleeting satisfaction, and inevitable boredom, which then gives rise to new desire. The only hope for peace, he grimly concluded, lies in finding a way to temporarily silence the will. This might happen in moments of pure aesthetic contemplation, when we lose ourselves in art or music and become a pure will-less subject of knowledge. Or, more permanently, it can be achieved through a path of asceticism and denial, leading to a state of enlightened resignation. This dark vision of a primal, irrational force at the heart of existence would cast a long shadow, deeply influencing our next thinker, who would take this concept of the will and transform it from a source of cosmic suffering into a wellspring of joyous, life-affirming power. Number 14. Nietzsche. Perception, Power, and Illusion. We emerge from the pessimistic and world-denying shadow of Arthur Schopenhauer, who saw the cosmic will as a curse to be escaped, and step into the brilliant, bracing, and often blinding sunlight of Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche, a classical philologist by training and a philosopher by nature, took Schopenhauer's core idea of a fundamental, irrational driving force at the heart of existence, but he inverted its value completely. He embraced this force, celebrated it, and gave it a new, more dynamic name: the will to power. For Nietzsche, the primary drive of every single being, from the smallest amoeba to the most complex human society, is not merely to survive, as Schopenhauer and Darwin thought, but to expand, to grow, to overcome obstacles, to dominate its environment, and to express its inherent strength. Life is not a miserable struggle for existence. It is an glorious, affirmative struggle for power. Every action we take, every thought we have, every feeling we experience is a manifestation of this fundamental will to power, seeking to enhance and discharge its strength. With this as his philosophical foundation, Nietzsche launched one of history's most devastating attacks on the very notion of objective truth. He introduced the powerful doctrine of perspectivism. There is no God's eye view of reality, he argued. There are no eternal, objective facts, only interpretations. Our consciousness, our senses, and our much prized reason do not give us a transparent window onto the world as it is. Instead, they are tools and organs that have evolved in the service of our particular organism's will to power. Our perception is not a passive reception of information from the world. It is an active, aggressive, and creative act of simplification, organization, and falsification. We see what we need to see in order to survive, thrive, and enhance our feeling of power. Consciousness itself, that faculty of which humanity is so proud, was, in Nietzsche's view, a rather superficial and late development in the history of life. He saw it as a thin, delicate crust on top of a vast, deep, and far more powerful unconscious realm of instincts, drives, and affects. The real work, the real thinking, is done in the dark, by the complex interplay of competing wills to power within our own bodies. He argued that consciousness arose not for the purpose of self-knowledge, but for the purpose of social communication. We are herd animals, and we needed to be able to make our needs and intentions understood by others. To do this, we had to create a simplified, symbolic, and ultimately false version of ourselves and our inner states to present to the herd. We flattened our profound inner complexity into the clumsy grammar of language. The very idea of the I, the unified, conscious self that we believe sits at the center of our being, is a grammatical fiction. We have a thought, and our linguistic habit leads us to invent a doer behind the deed, an I who is doing the thinking. In reality, Nietzsche claims, a thought comes when it wishes, not when I wish. The true self is the body, the dynamic, ever-changing configuration of countless drives. Consciousness is not the master in its own house. It is a hesitant and often confused spokesperson for forces it barely understands. For Nietzsche, then, consciousness is not a tool for discovering truth, but a creative, artistic force that shapes a world for us to live in, a world that enhances our feeling of power. He challenges us to move beyond a passive awareness and to actively use this consciousness as an artist uses a brush, to create our own values and to become the poets of our own lives. From this deeply embodied and dynamic view of mind, we now turn to a thinker who, through the lens of the new science of psychology, would describe this flowing, personal, and selective nature of our inner world with an equally powerful and enduring metaphor. Number 15. William James, The Stream of Consciousness. After the profound philosophical deconstructions of Nietzsche and Hume, who saw the conscious self as a grammatical fiction or an illusory bundle, our journey now seeks to describe consciousness not as a philosophical problem to be solved, but as a living, breathing phenomenon to be carefully observed. We arrive at the vibrant intersection of philosophy and the nascent science of psychology, guided by the brilliant American philosopher and physician William James. A pragmatist at heart,
James sought to move away from the centuries-old debates about what the soul was made of, and instead to describe the rich, complex phenomena of our mental life with scientific rigor and profound introspective honesty. His most lasting and influential contribution to this quest is a powerful and deeply intuitive metaphor that has shaped our understanding of the mind ever since. Consciousness, he insisted, is not a thing. It is not chopped up into discrete bits or linked together like a chain. It flows. He famously called it the stream of thought, or more commonly, the stream of consciousness. In his monumental work, The Principles of Psychology, he argued that this stream has 5 essential and undeniable characteristics. First, it is personal. My thoughts belong to me, and your thoughts belong to you. There is always a sense of ownership, a warmth and intimacy to our own consciousness that separates it from all others. Second, it is in constant change. We can never have the exact same thought or sensation twice, because the mind we have it with has been irrevocably modified by every experience that came before. A permanently existing idea which makes its appearance before the footlights of consciousness at periodical intervals is as mythological an entity as the Jack of Spades. Third, it is sensibly continuous. Despite gaps in time, like falling asleep or being knocked unconscious, we wake up with an immediate feeling of connection to the person we were before. The stream has a felt continuity, bridging these gaps. Fourth, consciousness is cognitive or intentional. It is always aware of something. It is transitive, always pointing towards objects and ideas that seem to be independent of itself. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, it is selective. Consciousness is not a passive receiver of all the stimuli bombarding our senses. It is an active agent of choice and attention. From the blooming, buzzing confusion of the world, it carves out a reality by choosing what to focus on, what to care about, and what to ignore. Attention, James wrote, is the taking possession by the mind, in clear and vivid form, of one out of what seems several simultaneously possible objects or trains of thought. James also gave us a richer picture of the inner landscape of this stream. He described it as having both a focus and a fringe. The focus is the clear, distinct center of our attention, the thing we are actively thinking about. But surrounding this focus is a halo of vague awareness, a psychic overtone he called the fringe. This fringe contains our feelings of relation, our sense of direction, the almost there feeling of a forgotten name, or the sense of if or but. These vague feelings, he argued, are not trivial. They are what guide the flow of our thought. He described this flow as a rhythm of perchings and flights. The perchings are the substantive parts, where the stream slows down to rest on a clear thought or image. The flights are the transitive parts, the swift and fleeting feelings of relation that carry us from one perching to the next. While James beautifully charted the surface of this flowing river, our next guide would argue that the most powerful and often dangerous currents lay hidden in the vast, dark, and turbulent depths below.
Number 16. Freud. The split between conscious and unconscious. While the American psychologist William James was meticulously charting the flowing, sunlit surface of the stream of consciousness, a Viennese physician named Sigmund Freud was developing a revolutionary and deeply unsettling new map of the mind. His work, born not from philosophical speculation, but from his intensive clinical practice with patients suffering from hysteria and other neurotic disorders, would shatter the prevailing view that our conscious mind is the whole of our mental life. Freud proposed a radical idea that would permanently alter the Western understanding of the self, that our conscious awareness is but a tiny, visible tip of a vast and powerful psychic iceberg, most of which lies hidden from our own view. Freud's initial topographical model divided the mind into 3 distinct regions. At the very top is the conscious mind. This contains all the thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and memories that we are aware of at any given moment. This is the part of our mind that we identify as us, the seat of our rational, waking life.
Just below the surface lies the preconscious. This region holds all the information that is not currently in our awareness, but can easily be brought to the surface with a moment's effort, such as the name of a childhood friend, the capital of France, or what you ate for breakfast this morning. It acts as a kind of waiting room for consciousness. But the largest and by far the most influential region in Freud's map was the vast, hidden, and dark territory of the unconscious. For Freud, the unconscious is not merely the absence of consciousness, as Leibniz had suggested. It is a dynamic, active, and seething cauldron of primitive instincts, repressed desires, traumatic memories, and socially unacceptable urges. These are thoughts and feelings that are so disturbing, threatening, or painful to our conscious sense of self that they have been actively and forcefully pushed down and locked away from our awareness through a powerful defense mechanism called repression. Though they are hidden, these unconscious forces are not dormant. They exert a tremendous and continuous influence over our conscious lives, shaping our personalities, driving our behaviors, motivating our choices, and causing our anxieties and neurotic symptoms. They are constantly struggling to break through into consciousness, but they can only do so in disguised and symbolic forms, in the bizarre narratives of our dreams, in unintentional slips of the tongue, now known as Freudian slips, in our jokes, in our choice of romantic partners, and in the strange and seemingly irrational symptoms of mental illness. Later, Freud refined this model into his famous structural model, which saw the personality as a dynamic and unending conflict between three powerful agencies. The id is the entirely unconscious primal part of the psyche, the reservoir of our most basic instinctual drives. It operates on the pleasure principle, demanding immediate gratification for all its irrational urges for sex and aggression. Opposing it is the superego, our internalized moral compass, the set of rules, ideals, and prohibitions that we have absorbed from our parents and society. It represents our conscience and our ideal self, constantly striving for perfection and punishing us with feelings of guilt and shame. Caught in the middle is the poor ego. The ego is the largely conscious, rational part of the personality that we identify as ourself. It operates on the reality principle, and its difficult job to mediate the primal demands of the id, the moralistic restrictions of the superego, and the constraints of the external world. Consciousness, in this view, is the embattled ego, a rider on a powerful, unruly horse desperately trying to maintain control. Freud's revolution was to show that we are not masters in our own house. Our conscious awareness is a fragile compromise, a surface phenomenon shaped by deep, hidden conflicts. While Freud sought to map these hidden depths through the interpretation of his patients' words, a radically different approach was emerging simultaneously, one that would dismiss this entire inner world as unscientific and focus only on what could be objectively seen and measured from the outside.
Number 17. Pavlov. Conditioned response and awareness. We journey now from the deep, hidden, and interpretive world of Freudian psychoanalysis, with its dark and complex inner dramas, to a place that could not be more different, the sterile, objective, and meticulously controlled environment of a scientific laboratory in early 20th century Russia. While Freud was listening to his patients' stories to map the unconscious mind, a Russian physiologist named Ivan Pavlov was observing his dog's saliva and, almost entirely by accident, discovered a fundamental principle of learning that would launch a new and revolutionary school of psychology. Pavlov was not initially interested in psychology or consciousness at all. He was a Nobel Prize-winning physiologist studying the digestive system. His research involved surgically implanting devices in dogs to precisely measure the amount of saliva they produced in response to food. The natural, unlearned response of a dog salivating when it sees or smells food is a simple biological reflex. In his terminology,
The food is an unconditioned stimulus, and the salivation is an unconditioned response. But Pavlov, a man of immense scientific curiosity and keen observation, noticed something strange was happening in his lab. The dogs often began to salivate before the food was actually presented to them. They would salivate at the mere sight of the lab assistant who fed them, or at the sound of his approaching footsteps, or even at the sight of their food bowl. Pavlov realized that the dog's nervous systems were learning to associate these other neutral stimuli with the food itself. This accidental observation intrigued him, and he shifted the focus of his research to investigate this phenomenon systematically. In his now famous experiments, he chose a neutral stimulus, something that would normally have no effect on salivation, such as the sound of a metronome or a bell. He would then ring the bell and, immediately afterwards, present the food to the dog. He repeated this pairing over and over again: bell, then food, bell, then food. After several repetitions, a new learned connection was forged in the dog's brain. The sound of the bell alone was now enough to make the dog salivate, even when no food was present. The previously neutral stimulus, the bell, had become a conditioned stimulus, and it now produced a new learned response, salivation, which he called the conditioned response. This process he named classical conditioning. The implications of this discovery were immense. Pavlov had demonstrated in a clear, objective, and measurable way how an organism could learn a new behavior through simple association. Crucially, this explanation required no reference whatsoever to the dog's inner mental state. There was no need to talk about the dog's thoughts, expectations, desires, or awareness. The learning process could be described purely in terms of observable stimuli and responses. It was a purely mechanistic explanation of learning, treating the brain as a kind of biological telephone switchboard, making new connections between sensory inputs and behavioral outputs based on experience. This objective, scientific approach was a breath of fresh air for many researchers who were growing weary of the speculative, untestable, and often contradictory theories of introspection and psychoanalysis. Pavlov had provided a powerful new paradigm, a way to study behavior scientifically without getting entangled in the messy, subjective, and seemingly inaccessible world of consciousness. He had laid the first foundational stone for a new psychology of behaviorism, which our next thinker would build into a towering and all-encompassing edifice that sought to explain all human action without any reference to the mind at all.
Number 18. Skinner. Behavior without a self. Following the objective, scientific path laid down by Ivan Pavlov, we now meet the most influential, brilliant, and controversial figure of behaviorism, the American psychologist B.F. Skinner. If Pavlov showed how new reflexes could be learned through association, Skinner took this principle to its ultimate and radical conclusion, arguing that all complex human behavior, from learning to speak to writing a symphony, is shaped not by our inner thoughts, intentions, or feelings, but by our lifelong history of environmental consequences. Skinner championed a philosophy he called radical behaviorism. He insisted that psychology, if it was to be a true science like physics or chemistry, must abandon all talk of internal mental states. Concepts like mind, will, feelings, intentions, and consciousness itself were, in his view, unscientific fictions. He referred to them as explanatory fictions, terms that gave us the illusion of an explanation, but in reality explained nothing. To say he ate because he felt hungry was, for Skinner, a meaningless tautology. We only know he is hungry because he eats. The mind was simply a black box that was inaccessible to scientific observation, and therefore irrelevant to a scientific explanation of behavior.
The only things that mattered were the observable inputs from the environment and the observable behavioral outputs of the organism. The core of Skinner's life's work was his principle of operant conditioning. While Pavlov's classical conditioning dealt with involuntary reflexes, operant conditioning explained how we learn new voluntary or operant behaviors that operate on the environment. The concept is elegantly simple. Behavior that is followed by a positive consequence, a reinforcer, is more likely to be repeated in the future. Behavior that is followed by a negative consequence, punishment, or no consequence at all, extinction, is less likely to be repeated. To study this principle with scientific precision, he invented the famous Skinner box, or operant conditioning chamber. Inside this box, a rat or a pigeon could be isolated and observed. The box contained a lever or a disc. If the animal, through its natural exploratory behavior, happened to press the lever, a food pellet would be dispensed. The food acted as a powerful reinforcer, and the animal would quickly learn to press the lever deliberately to receive more food. Skinner discovered that he could shape an animal's behavior with remarkable precision by carefully controlling these contingencies of reinforcement. He could teach pigeons to play ping pong, to guide a missile, or to recognize different words. He then extrapolated this principle to all human activity. We speak the way we do because certain utterances were reinforced by our parents. We work hard at our jobs because we are reinforced by a paycheck. We fall in love because we are reinforced by the affection of another person. The very idea of a self or a person as a conscious, autonomous agent who makes free choices was, for Skinner, a pre-scientific and dangerous illusion. You are not an originating agent. You are simply a repertoire of behaviors that has been selected and shaped by your unique environmental history. The deeply ingrained feeling that we have free will is simply a result of our ignorance of the complex environmental causes that have actually determined our actions. Consciousness, in this radical view, has no causal power whatsoever. It is an epiphenomenon, a byproduct of behavior, like the froth on a wave. It is caused by the movement of the water, but has no effect back upon it. To try and understand behavior by looking at consciousness is like trying to understand a car engine by analyzing the sound of its exhaust. For decades, this behaviorist view dominated academic psychology, but it could not last. A new revolution was coming, one that would reopen the black box and boldly declare that the secrets of the mind were not only accessible, but could be found by looking directly at the intricate electrical and chemical machinery of the brain.
Number 19. Francis Crick, The Astonishing Hypothesis. For much of the 20th century, the dominant force of behaviorism, led by figures like B.F. Skinner, insisted that the mind's inner workings were an inaccessible black box, best left unopened by serious scientists. But a cognitive revolution was brewing, a movement fueled by the rise of computer science and neuroscience, a movement determined to peer inside that box and map its contents. Our journey now brings us to a towering figure of modern science, who, late in his celebrated career, turned his formidable intellect from the code of life to the mystery of consciousness itself. We meet Francis Crick, the British molecular biologist who, along with James Watson, had co-discovered the double helix structure of DNA, unraveling one of life's greatest secrets. Having deciphered the language of the gene, Crick dedicated his final decades to what he saw as the next great frontier for science, providing a complete, physical explanation for conscious awareness. Crick was a staunch materialist and a firm reductionist. He advanced what he called the astonishing hypothesis, a proposal that is, in his own words, so alien to the ideas of most people living today that it can truly be called astonishing. This hypothesis is that you, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will
are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. His stated goal was to strip away all remaining layers of mysticism, spirituality, and philosophical confusion from the concept of consciousness, and to treat it as a biological problem, one that could be solved with the empirical tools of neuroscience, just like any other biological problem. He was famously impatient with what he considered to be the sterile and unproductive nature of philosophical debates, particularly about the intractable problem of qualia, the subjective quality of experience, like the redness of red. He argued that these questions were premature. The first and most crucial step, he insisted, was to stop treating the mind as magical and to begin the hard, empirical work of finding its physical basis in the brain. His scientific strategy was to search for the neural correlates of consciousness, or NCCs. The idea was elegantly simple in principle: to isolate a single, specific aspect of conscious experience, and then to pinpoint the specific, measurable neural activity that is its direct counterpart. He believed that our visual system, being the most understood part of our brain, was the most promising starting point for this research. If scientists could figure out precisely what is happening in the neurons of your brain at the exact moment you become consciously aware of seeing, for example, a red apple, and how that differs from when the image of the apple is processed unconsciously, we would gain a vital foothold on the entire problem. One of the specific ideas he and his longtime collaborator, the neuroscientist Christoph Koch, investigated was the binding problem. When you see that red apple, different parts of your brain are processing its color, its round shape, its location, and its identity as a fruit. The binding problem is the question of how all these separate neural activities are bound together into a single, unified, coherent conscious experience. Crick and Koch hypothesized that this binding might be achieved through the synchronized firing of neurons at a specific frequency, around 40 Hz. When all the different neural populations processing the apple's various features fire their electrical signals together in this specific rhythm, they become bound into one conscious percept. While this particular theory remains a subject of intense debate, it perfectly illustrates Crick's scientific approach: to move from broad, unanswerable philosophical questions to specific, testable hypotheses about neural mechanisms. He was looking for the gears, levers, and wiring of the mind, utterly convinced that consciousness was not a ghost in the machine, but was simply the intricate and astonishing music produced by the machine's operations. This strong reductionist view, however, soon faced a powerful philosophical challenge from our next thinker, who argued that even if you could map every single neuron in the brain, you would still be missing the most important piece of the puzzle.
Number 20. John Searle. Consciousness as biological process. Emerging from the hard-nosed scientific reductionism of Francis Crick, who sought to explain consciousness entirely through the mechanical and electrical behavior of neurons, our journey now encounters a prominent American philosopher who stands with one foot firmly in the world of biology and the other firmly in the camp of subjective experience. The philosopher, John Searle, agrees that consciousness is a biological phenomenon, a natural feature of the world. But he mounts one of the most famous and enduring arguments against the idea that it could ever be replicated by a machine that merely shuffles symbols, no matter how intelligently it behaves. Searle's position, which he calls biological naturalism, is, on the surface, straightforward. Consciousness, he says, is a natural, higher-level feature of the brain, in the same way that liquidity is a higher-level feature of water molecules, or digestion is a higher-level feature of the stomach. It is caused by the behavior of lower-level elements, namely neurons firing in specific patterns, and it is itself a feature of the system they compose. He completely rejects the old Cartesian dualism of a non-physical mind separate from a physical body. For Searle, consciousness is as real and as physical as any other biological process. There is no magic, no mystery substance.
However, and this is his crucial point, he argues that this specific biological process produces something unique and irreducible: first-person, qualitative, subjective awareness. It is this undeniable, private reality of what it feels like to be you that he believes the strongest proponents of artificial intelligence completely miss. To make his point with devastating clarity, he devised his celebrated Chinese room thought experiment. He asks you to imagine yourself, a native English speaker, who knows not a single word of Chinese, locked inside a room. Inside this room with you are several baskets full of Chinese symbols and a massive rule book written entirely in English. This rulebook provides a set of instructions for manipulating the Chinese symbols purely based on their shape and syntax. For instance, a rule might say, when you see this squiggly symbol followed by that curvy symbol, find the symbol that looks like a box and write it on a new piece of paper. People outside the room, who are native Chinese speakers, pass slips of paper with questions written in Chinese under the door. Following your English rulebook, you look at the incoming symbols, follow the instructions meticulously, and assemble a new set of symbols, which you then pass back out under the door. You get so good at following the rules that your answers become grammatically perfect and contextually appropriate, so much so that they are completely indistinguishable from those of a native Chinese speaker. The people outside, who are convinced that the person or entity inside the room understands Chinese perfectly. Searle then asks the critical question: do you, the person inside the room, understand Chinese? His answer is a definitive and resounding no. You have manipulated formal symbols according to a syntactic program, but you have absolutely no understanding of what any of it means. You have the syntax, but you have no semantics. The computer, Searle argues, is in exactly the same position as the person in the room. It is a powerful symbol-manipulating machine. It can process information and follow a program brilliantly, but it has no understanding, no mind, and no consciousness. For Searle, the fatal error of what he calls strong AI is that it equates the simulation of intelligence with the duplication of it. He argues that brains have specific causal biological powers that produce the actual feeling of understanding and the subjective reality of consciousness. A machine made of silicon chips can simulate this process beautifully, but it can never create the real thing, just as a computer simulation of a rainstorm will not make you wet. Consciousness is not a program. It is a biological phenomenon. And while Searle passionately defends this first-person reality, our next philosopher will argue that this very belief in a rich inner subjective world is the last and greatest illusion we must overcome.
Number 21. Daniel Dennett. The Illusion of the Narrative Self. In stark and direct opposition to John Searle's passionate defense of consciousness as an irreducible, first-person biological reality, our journey now encounters the influential American philosopher and cognitive scientist Daniel Dennett. Dennett presents one of the most intellectually challenging and radically counterintuitive theories on our entire exploration, arguing that the very thing Searle defends, that rich, private, inner subjective quality of experience, what philosophers call qualia, is itself a profound and persistent illusion. Dennett is a firm materialist and a functionalist, and he believes that the so-called hard problem of consciousness is not a real scientific problem, but a philosophical mistake, a grand confusion born from our own deep-seated but ultimately misleading intuitions. He proposes that to make real progress, we must first abandon what he memorably calls the Cartesian theater. This is the common sense but deeply flawed idea that there is a single, central place in the brain where everything comes together, a kind of mental stage or screening room where a little me, a homunculus, sits watching a show of sensory experiences as they happen. Modern neuroscience, he points out with force, has found no such place.
There is no central headquarters, no master controller. Instead, the brain is a massively parallel processor, a distributed system with countless different tasks, or daemons, all happening at once in different locations and at different times. So, if there's no theater, how does this distributed parallel processing create the feeling of a single unified stream of consciousness? Dennett's alternative is his multiple drafts model. He suggests that at any given moment, various specialist circuits in the brain are generating multiple drafts, or partial narratives and interpretations, about what is going on in the world. These drafts are constantly being edited, updated, revised, and competed over by other neural processes. There is no final, finished, authoritative version that gets presented in the Cartesian theater for the self to experience. Consciousness is not one big, cohesive narrative. It is the chaotic, overlapping, and sometimes competing process of all these various narratives being generated and jockeying for influence. What we call our conscious experience at any given moment is simply the draft or collection of drafts that happens to win out and exert the most control over our behavior. The unified, continuous self that we feel ourselves to be is not a pre-existing entity that has experiences. It is itself a story, a center of narrative gravity. Much like the center of gravity of a physical object, the self isn't a real physical thing, but a wonderfully useful abstraction. The self is a constantly updated fiction that our brain spins to make sense of its own complex operations and to present a coherent, simplified story to the world and to itself. Dennett's proposed method for studying all this is what he calls heterophenomenology. It means taking people's first-person reports about their experiences seriously, but treating them not as direct, infallible windows onto an inner reality, but as a kind of fictional text. We analyze the story the person tells about their consciousness to understand the underlying computational processes in the brain that produce that story in the first place. For Dennett, consciousness is not a deep and spooky mystery to be solved, but a magnificent magic trick to be explained. It's a user illusion, a fantastically effective and efficient interface that the brain creates for itself, which allows a fantastically complex system to have a simplified and ultimately false model of its own operations. He seeks to dissolve the mystery of consciousness into the observable functions and computations of the brain. But for our next philosopher, this bold attempt to explain away the mystery only serves to highlight just how deep, difficult, and astonishingly real it truly is.
Number 22. David Chalmers, The Hard Problem of Consciousness. After Daniel Dennett's vigorous and sustained attempt to dissolve consciousness into a clever user illusion created by the brain's computational processes, our journey now arrives at a contemporary philosopher who almost single-handedly brought the deep mystery of subjective experience roaring back to the scientific and philosophical debate. The Australian philosopher and cognitive scientist David Chalmers famously and influentially drew a sharp distinction between what he called the easy problems and the one truly hard problem of consciousness. The easy problems, he is quick to explain, are not actually easy at all. They are, in fact, among the most complex and challenging questions in modern neuroscience, but they are, in principle, solvable through the standard methods of cognitive science. These are problems about function and mechanism. They include questions like, how does the brain process sensory information from the eyes and ears? How does it integrate that information to control behavior and speech? How do we focus our attention on one stimulus while ignoring others? How does the brain distinguish between being awake and being asleep? And what are the neural mechanisms underlying these states? These are all problems about explaining how the brain behaves and how it processes information. Dennett and neuroscientists like Francis Crick focus entirely on these problems, believing that once we have solved all of them, we will have, by default, solved the entire mystery of consciousness. But Chalmers argues that this is a profound mistake.
He insists that even if we had a perfect neuron-for-neuron explanation of how the brain functions, how it accesses information, and how it controls behavior, we would still be left with a monumental, unanswered question, the hard problem. Why does any of this physical, objective, third-person processing feel like anything at all from the inside? Why is there a subjective, first-person experience associated with it? Why do we have what philosophers call qualia, the inner, private, ineffable quality of the redness of red, the sharp sting of pain, the rich aroma of coffee, the feeling of profound joy? Why isn't all of this complex information processing simply carried out in the dark, without any inner movie, any private world of feeling attached to it? This, for Chalmers, is the central, baffling mystery. To illustrate the deep conceptual gap between function and experience, he revitalizes the philosophical zombie thought experiment. Imagine a being that is physically and behaviorally identical to a human being in every single conceivable way. It has a brain made of the same atoms, organized in the same structure. It talks, it laughs, it writes poetry, it interacts with others, and it reports feeling pain when it is injured. From the outside, it is completely indistinguishable from a conscious person. The only difference is that on the inside, there is nothing. It has no subjective experience whatsoever. All the lights are off. Chalmers argues that if such a zombie is logically conceivable, even if it doesn't and cannot exist in our physical world, it proves that consciousness is a further fact about a person, an additional ingredient in the universe over and above all the physical and functional properties. Because you can, in principle, have all the physical properties without the experiential ones, the experiential properties cannot be fully explained by or reduced to the physical properties alone. His radical and controversial proposal is that we may need to treat experience as a fundamental property of the universe, just as we treat mass, charge, or space-time. It cannot be reduced to anything simpler. This idea, known as naturalistic dualism or property dualism, suggests that consciousness is a basic feature of reality, governed by its own fundamental psychophysical laws, and that the task of a future science of consciousness will be to discover these laws. This sets the stage perfectly for our next thinker, who offers a bold scientific theory that attempts to do just that, to specify the physical properties that any system must have in order to feel like something.
Number 23. Giulio Tononi, Integrated Information Theory. From David Chalmers' compelling philosophical argument that consciousness might be a fundamental property of the universe, our journey now turns to a neuroscientist and psychiatrist who has proposed a precise, ambitious, and scientifically testable theory of what this fundamental property might actually be. Giulio Tononi's Integrated Information Theory, or IIT, takes a unique and principled approach. It does not start by asking what consciousness is for, or how it evolved, or what behaviors it enables. Instead, it starts with the undeniable reality of the experience itself, with phenomenology, and asks, what are the essential, undeniable properties of any conscious experience? From these properties, it then deduces what kind of physical systems could possibly account for them. Tononi begins by identifying 5 core axioms of any possible conscious experience. He argues that any experience is, first, intrinsically existing. It exists from its own perspective. Second, it is structured. It is composed of many distinguishable elements. Third, it is specific. It is the particular way it is out of a vast number of possibilities. Fourth, it is unified. It is an irreducible whole that cannot be broken down into separate experiences. And fifth, it is definite. It has borders, containing certain things and excluding others. From these axioms, he derives a set of postulates about what physical systems must be like in order to generate such experience. The central, powerful idea of the theory is that consciousness is, precisely, integrated information. Let's break down those 2 key terms.
Information here means that a system must have a vast repertoire of possible states. When the system enters one particular state, it is selecting from among trillions upon trillions of other possibilities, thereby massively reducing uncertainty. The more potential states a system has, the more information it contains. Integration, however, is the crucial part that distinguishes a conscious system from other information-rich systems. Integration means that the system must be a deeply unified whole. It cannot be broken down into a collection of independent, smaller components without losing its essence. The system as a whole must be more than the sum of its parts. Tononi uses the analogy of a digital camera. A camera with 1,000,000 pixels has a huge amount of information. Each pixel can be on or off in a specific way, creating millions of possible images. But the camera is not conscious because this information is not integrated. Each pixel is essentially independent of the others. You could split the sensor in half and you would just have two smaller functioning cameras. In stark contrast, the human brain is a marvel of integration. Every neuron is intricately and reciprocally connected with countless others in a complex web. You cannot simply split the brain's network in half without fundamentally changing and destroying the whole system. According to IIT, this deep, irreducible integration is what allows the brain to generate a single, unified conscious experience. Tononi proposes a way to mathematically measure this integrated information with a quantity he calls phi, represented by the Greek letter phi. Phi measures, in bits, how much a system as a whole is irreducible to its individual parts. A system with a low phi, like the digital camera or even a conventional supercomputer that perfectly simulates a brain, is not conscious. A system with a high phi, like a human brain in a waking or dreaming state, is conscious. The theory makes a number of bold and testable predictions. It suggests that consciousness can be found in varying degrees in many biological systems, including most animals. It suggests that consciousness is a matter of degree. It is not an all-or-nothing property. And it implies that a conventional computer, no matter how intelligent it becomes, could never be truly conscious, because its underlying architecture is not integrated. Its phi would be virtually zero. From this ambitious theory of what consciousness is physically, we now turn to a complementary theory of what consciousness does for a living organism, viewing it as our brain's best continuous guess about the nature of reality.
Number 24. Anil Seth, Consciousness as Controlled Hallucination. Having explored Giulio Tononi's highly mathematical theory that consciousness is a measure of a system's integrated information, our journey now brings us to the British neuroscientist and author Anil Seth, who offers a powerful and deeply intuitive perspective that is transforming how we think about perception. Instead of focusing primarily on what consciousness is in a physical sense, Seth's work focuses on what consciousness does for a living organism and how it arises from the brain's most fundamental and pressing task, staying alive. Seth is a leading proponent of the predictive processing or predictive brain framework. According to this increasingly influential view, the brain is not a passive organ that sits in the dark skull waiting to receive sensory information from the outside world and then trying to figure out what it all means. This classical outside-in view of perception is, he argues, fundamentally wrong. Instead, the brain is an active and constantly working prediction machine. It is always, in every moment, generating hypotheses or best guesses about the causes of the sensory signals it receives from the body and the world. Our conscious experience, in this view, is not a direct window onto an objective reality. It is our brain's best guess. It is a construction, an active inference, a model of the world that the brain creates from the top down. Seth uses a striking and wonderfully provocative phrase to describe this. Our conscious reality is a controlled hallucination. Let's understand both parts of that powerful phrase. The hallucination part emphasizes that all our perceptual experience, everything we see, hear, feel, and touch,
comes from the inside out, not the outside in. The brain uses its prior beliefs, its past experiences, and its deep-seated models of the world to generate a prediction of what is out there. This internally generated prediction is what we consciously see and hear. We don't experience the raw sensory data, we experience the brain's interpretation of that data. The controlled part of the phrase is what keeps our hallucinations tethered to reality and stops us from floating off into fantasy. The sensory signals that flow from the outside world, from our eyes, ears, and skin, are not creating the experience itself. Instead, they function as continuous prediction error signals. They are constantly updating and correcting the brain's hallucinatory guesses. As long as the sensory input from the world broadly matches the brain's predictions, the prediction error is low, and our hallucination is a successful perception of reality. When there is a mismatch, the prediction error is high, and the brain must rapidly update its model, a process we call learning. This framework extends to all aspects of consciousness, including our very experience of being a self. The feeling of being a unique, continuous self is also a perception. It is the brain's best guess about what it is to be this particular body. It's a collection of many different perceptions related to our physical form, our memories, our emotions, our social interactions, and our sense of agency. It too is another layer of controlled hallucination, a vital one for our survival. For Seth, the mystery of consciousness is deeply and inextricably tied to the biological mechanisms of life. Our predictive brains are fundamentally geared towards regulating our bodies and ensuring our continued existence. All of our conscious experiences, from the color blue to the feeling of joy to the stable sense of self, are part of this deeply embodied, pragmatic, and predictive process of staying alive. This view of consciousness as an internally generated construction provides a perfect bridge, taking us from the world of modern neuroscience back to the ancient traditions that have been exploring these inner worlds for millennia.
Number 25. Vedanta. Atman and Brahman are one. Our exploration through the intricate landscape of modern science, culminating in the view of consciousness as a kind of controlled hallucination generated by the brain, now leads us to travel full circle. We return to the ancient, fertile soil of India, to the sophisticated philosophical system of Vedanta, which grew directly out of the mystical insights of the Upanishads. But we return with a fresh perspective, now able to see these ancient ideas not merely as historical curiosities, but as a profound and challenging counterpoint to the entire modern scientific search. While neuroscience meticulously searches for the neural correlates of consciousness within the complex machinery of the brain, seeking to explain how matter produces mind, Vedanta takes a radically different and more direct approach. It suggests that the entire premise is backwards. Consciousness is not something that is produced by the brain or the body. Instead, it proposes that consciousness is the fundamental, primary reality in which the brain, the body, and the entire universe appear and are known. Vedanta is the systematic and logical exposition of the core teaching we first encountered at the beginning of our journey, the ultimate identity of Atman and Brahman. Atman is the individual self, the subjective core of our being, the pure, silent witness of all our experiences. Brahman is the ultimate universal reality, the absolute, formless ground of all existence. The great central declaration of Vedanta, particularly in its non-dual or Advaita school, is that these two, which appear to be so vastly different, the small inner self and the vast outer reality, are not separate. They are and always have been one and the same. So what is the experience we call our personal consciousness? From the Vedantic perspective, it is a profound case of mistaken identity. Pure, boundless, universal consciousness, which is Brahman, becomes associated with a particular body and mind. Through a mysterious power called Maya, which means both illusion and creative power, this universal and formless consciousness appears to be limited, fragmented, and contained within a single person. This gives rise to the experience of being a separate individual, an ego, living in a world of other separate objects and people. This limited self, driven by its desires and fears, then experiences a sense of lack, incompleteness, and a cycle of suffering known as samsara. The entire purpose of the spiritual path in Vedanta is to see through this fundamental illusion. This is not about adding a new belief or learning a new fact, but about removing a false assumption through a process of rigorous self-inquiry called vichara. The central question of this inquiry is, who am I? By turning awareness back upon itself and investigating the very source of the I thought, one begins to discriminate between the real and the unreal. You can observe your body, so you are not the body. You can observe your thoughts, so you are not the thoughts. You can observe your emotions, so you are not your emotions. By systematically negating all the objects that appear in awareness, one is left with that which can never be an object, the pure subject consciousness itself. This is the Atman. The final realization of this truth is not an intellectual understanding, but a direct, transformative experience called moksha, or liberation. It is the definitive awakening from the controlled hallucination of individuality. From this profound vision of a single universal self, we now turn to another great Eastern tradition that takes an equally radical path of inquiry, but one that leads not to a universal self, but to a profound, dynamic, and liberating emptiness. Number 26. Zen Buddhism, Emptiness and No Mind. Leaving the profound Vedantic assertion of a single, universal self, the Atman that is ultimately one with the absolute reality of Brahman, our journey now takes a subtle but crucial turn. We enter the spare and minimalist world of Zen Buddhism, a tradition that inherited the Buddha's core teaching of not self and honed it into a razor-sharp practice of direct, unmediated experience. If Vedanta's ultimate answer to the question, who am I, could be summarized as, I am the Absolute, Zen's response is often a deafening silence, a cryptic riddle, or perhaps a sharp rap with a master's stick designed to shatter the conceptual mind. Zen is less a philosophy to be understood and more a direct pointing to reality as it is, in this very moment, before our restless thoughts and labels carve it up into a world of separate things. At the very heart of Zen is the Mahayana Buddhist concept of sunyata, which is most often translated as emptiness. This is one of the most easily and frequently misunderstood ideas in all of Eastern thought. Emptiness, in this context, does not mean nothingness, a void, or a nihilistic blankness. Rather, it means that all phenomena, including ourselves, are empty of any intrinsic, independent, or separate existence. Everything arises in dependence on everything else in a vast, interconnected web of causality. A flower is empty of a separate, inherent flower self because it is entirely made of non-flower elements: the sun, the rain, the nutrients in the soil, the air. It has no fixed, standalone essence. In exactly the same way, the self that we cherish is empty. It is a temporary coming together of the 5 aggregates we encountered earlier: body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness itself. All of these components are in constant flux and are dependent on conditions outside of themselves. There is no permanent, unchanging thing at the center of it all, no CEO in the headquarters of the mind. The primary goal of Zen practice, particularly through Zazen or sitting meditation, is to have a direct, non-conceptual experience of this truth. The practice is deceptively simple: to sit upright and pay intimate attention to the breath, and to observe thoughts, feelings, and sensations as they arise and pass away, without getting entangled in them, without judging them, and without following them. Through this disciplined, patient practice, the tenacious grip of the ego begins to loosen. The relentless inner chatter, the constant commentary and judgment about ourselves and the world slowly begins to quiet down.
This can lead to a state of being known as mushin, which can be translated as no mind. No mind is not a state of being blank or spaced out. It is a mind that is free from the clinging and obstruction of the ego. It is a mind that can respond to situations spontaneously, fluidly, and with total appropriateness, without being filtered through the anxieties and rigid preconceptions of a separate self. It is the mind of an expert archer who releases the arrow without a conscious thought, or a musician who is so completely immersed in the music that they become one with their instrument and the sound. Consciousness, from the Zen perspective, is at its most pure and functional when it is empty of a me that is trying to control the show. It becomes like a mirror that simply and perfectly reflects whatever comes before it, without distortion or judgment. This path of letting go finds a powerful resonance in the natural, effortless flow described by our next tradition. Number 27. Taoism, flow and unforced presence. From the disciplined, focused silence of the Zen monastery, our path now meanders into the misty mountains, bamboo groves, and flowing rivers of ancient China, into the gentle and profound philosophical landscape of Taoism. While Zen often seeks to break through the rigid structures of the ego with focused discipline and sudden insight, Taoism offers a complementary path of yielding, of softening, of finding ultimate freedom by aligning oneself with the natural, spontaneous, and intelligent course of the universe. At the very heart of Taoism is the concept of the Tao, which is most often translated as the way. The Tao is the ultimate, ineffable, and mysterious principle of the universe. It is the natural, effortless, and harmonious flow of all things. It is not a creator God who stands outside of creation, but the underlying pattern, the cosmic intelligence that unfolds through every aspect of nature. The central text of Taoism, the Tao Te Ching, famously begins by stating, "The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name." The Tao is fundamentally beyond all our human concepts and words. It cannot be grasped by the intellect, but it can be sensed, felt, and followed. So what is the role of consciousness in relation to this great mysterious way? For the Taoist sage, the root of human suffering and frustration arises when we, with our clever and ambitious minds, separate ourselves from the Tao. The human mind, with its desire to control, to plan, and to dominate, creates an artificial self, an ego, that constantly tries to force its own will upon the world. We build rigid plans. We resist the natural flow of events. We strive, we strain, and we worry. This creates tension, friction, and a deep sense of alienation from the world and from our own true nature. The path back to harmony, peace, and effectiveness is the practice of Wu Wei. This is another core concept that is often misunderstood in the West. Wu Wei does not mean complete inaction, passivity, or lazy resignation. It is better translated as effortless action, non-striving, or spontaneous, non-coercive action. It is the supreme art of acting in perfect accord with the natural flow of the Tao, of moving with the current of life rather than struggling against it. It is the profound grace of a skilled surfer riding a powerful wave, using its immense energy rather than trying to fight it. To practice Wu Wei, one must cultivate a certain quality of consciousness, one that is quiet, observant, patient, and deeply receptive. It involves letting go of the ego's incessant need to be in charge and instead trusting the inherent wisdom of the Tao that flows through all things, including ourselves. It is a consciousness that aims to be as yielding and yet as powerful as water, which is the Taoist's favorite metaphor for the Tao itself. Water adapts to any container. It flows around the hardest obstacles without conflict. It always seeks the lowest ground, and yet, over time, It has the power to wear away the hardest stone. By emptying the mind of rigid ideas, fixed plans, and anxious striving, one becomes open, flexible, and responsive, able to act with incredible effectiveness and a profound sense of ease. Consciousness becomes less about directed, forceful thinking and more about a state of unforced presence, a simple, clear awareness that is one with the natural, intelligent unfolding of this very moment. This gentle yet powerful path of harmonizing with the universal flow finds a different, more devotional and passionate expression in our next tradition.
Number 28. Sufism. Witnessing the divine within. Our journey now takes us from the naturalistic and often impersonal flow of the Chinese Tao into the passionate, devotional, and ecstatic heart of Islamic mysticism, the tradition known as Sufism. While the Taoist seeks harmony with an ineffable way that manifests in nature, the Sufi seeks the annihilation of the self in the overwhelming and intimate love of a personal God, the divine beloved. Sufism is often called the heart of Islam. It is a path of direct experiential knowledge of God, a journey of transforming consciousness from a state of forgetfulness and separation into a state of continuous, loving union with the divine. Sufis teach that the core of the human being is a deep spiritual heart, which they call the qalb. This heart is not the physical organ, but a subtle faculty of perception, a spiritual eye capable of seeing the divine reality. In its original state, this heart is a perfect, polished mirror, reflecting the light of God. However, through our preoccupation with the material world and our attachment to our lower self, or nafs, this mirror has become veiled, rusted over, and tarnished. The nafs is the ego, the collection of our selfish desires, our pride, our anger, our greed, and our fears. It is this ego self that creates the painful illusion of being separate from God, and this perceived separation is the ultimate source of all our spiritual pain and longing. The entire purpose of the Sufi path is the purification of this heart, tazkiyat al-qalb, and the dissolution or fana of the nafs. This is achieved through a variety of spiritual practices designed to turn the aspirant's attention away from the distractions of the world and back towards God. The most central of these practices is dhikr, which means remembrance. Dhikr can take many forms, from the silent, constant repetition of God's names in the heart to rhythmic, ecstatic chanting, often accompanied by music and movement, as famously practiced by the whirling dervishes of the Mevlevi order. The constant practice of remembrance acts like a powerful polish for the rusted mirror of the heart. As the layers of egoic preoccupation are slowly and patiently scrubbed away, the mirror of consciousness begins to clear until it once again perfectly reflects its true source, the pure, dazzling light of the divine. Consciousness, from the Sufi perspective, is a divine secret placed within each human being. Its ultimate potential is to become a pure vessel for divine awareness. The goal is to move from the consciousness of the ego, the thought that I am this body, I am these thoughts, to the consciousness of the heart, which recognizes that all existence, all power, and all awareness come from God alone. In the highest states of mystical experience, the Sufi experiences fana, the annihilation of the false self in God, followed by baka, a state of subsistence and eternal life in God. The illusion of the separate self is gone, and the mystic realizes that they are nothing and God is everything. They become a perfect servant of God, an empty reed through which the divine breath flows, a channel for divine love and compassion in the world. This path of ecstatic love and the annihilation of the self in God finds a powerful, though often more subdued, parallel in the contemplative tradition of Christianity, which we will explore next. Number 29. Christian mysticism. Awareness as divine union. Following the passionate and devotional path of the Sufis, who seek to polish the mirror of the heart to perfectly reflect the divine beloved, our journey now enters the quiet, contemplative, and often hidden center of the Christian tradition to explore its own rich mystical stream. Here, too, the ultimate purpose and potential of consciousness is to transcend the limited, isolated, and fearful individual self and to experience a profound, conscious, and loving union with God. Christian mystics across many centuries, from the Desert Fathers of the 4th century to modern contemplatives, have spoken of an inner sanctuary, a sacred space deep within the human soul where God dwells. The German mystic Meister Eckhart called this the ground of the soul, or the divine spark, Seelenfunkeln, a divine, uncreated aspect of our being that is eternally and unchangeably one with God. The problem is that our ordinary, everyday consciousness, with its endless stream of thoughts, its restless desires, and its constant preoccupation with worldly concerns, completely obscures this deeper reality. We live on the noisy, turbulent surface of our beings, completely identified with our ego, which the mystics often call the false self. This false self, this construct of our own making, is the source of our anxiety, our pride, and our deep-seated feeling of separation from our divine source. The path of the Christian mystic is therefore a journey inward, a return to the center, a pilgrimage from the periphery of the mind to the silent sanctuary of the heart. It is a process of quieting the clamor of the false self in order to awaken to the silent, loving, and abiding presence within. A central practice on this path is contemplative prayer, sometimes called the prayer of quiet or centering prayer. This is a form of prayer that goes beyond words, thoughts, and images. It is not about talking to God, but about simply being with God in silent, loving attentiveness. In the anonymous 14th century English spiritual classic, The Cloud of Unknowing, the aspirant is instructed to put a cloud of forgetting below them, pushing away all thoughts of the world and their own life, and to place a cloud of unknowing above them, abandoning all intellectual attempts to figure God out with the rational mind. It is in this space of pure, naked, loving intent, stripped of all concepts, that union can be found. In this state of deep contemplative prayer, the rigid boundaries of the ego begin to soften and dissolve. Consciousness is no longer experienced as my private awareness, but as a participation in God's own awareness, a sharing in the divine life. The mystic experiences what the Eastern Orthodox tradition calls theosis, or deification. Not that the human being becomes God in essence, but that they become so permeated by God's grace and energy that they begin to share in the divine nature. It is, as St. Paul described it, a state of "it is no longer I that live, but Christ that lives in me." Consciousness is transformed from a tool of the ego used for its own selfish projects into a sacred vessel of divine love and peace. It becomes the meeting place, the bridal chamber, where the human and the divine meet in a nuptial union, a sacred marriage where two become one, yet remain distinct. This profound experience of consciousness as the site of divine indwelling is echoed in our next tradition, which maps this inner divine world with an intricate and ancient cosmological symbolism. Number 30. Kabbalah, the soul and the light of awareness. From the devotional and unitive paths of Sufism and Christian mysticism, which emphasize the loving surrender of the self to God, our journey now ventures into the ancient, complex, and esoteric world of Jewish mysticism, known as Kabbalah. Here, consciousness is understood not only as a personal space for achieving union with the divine, but also as a microcosm of the entire cosmic structure of creation. More than that,
It is seen as playing a vital and active role in the ongoing drama of the universe itself. Kabbalah teaches that all of reality unfolds from the Ein Sof, which means without end. This is the infinite, unknowable, and utterly transcendent Godhead, which is beyond all attributes and description. In order to create the world, the Ein Sof first performed an act of divine contraction or self-concealment, a process called tzimtzum. This created a conceptual space, a void, for a finite existence to emerge. Into this void, the Ein Sof emanated its divine light, which cascaded down through a series of 10 divine attributes or vessels, known as the Sephirot. These 10 Sephirot, with names like wisdom, chokmah, understanding, bina, and loving-kindness, chesed, form a symbolic map called the Tree of Life. This tree is the dynamic, archetypal structure of all reality, from the highest celestial realms right down to our physical world. The human soul in this intricate vision is a direct reflection of this cosmic structure. We are, as the scripture says, created in the image of God, which the Kabbalists interpret to mean that our own consciousness is a microcosm containing the very pattern of the 10 Sephirot. Our minds, our emotions, our spiritual faculties, and even our bodies are earthly expressions of these divine attributes. However, according to a central Kabbalistic myth, a cosmic catastrophe occurred during this process of creation. Some of the lower vessels of the Sephirot were too fragile to contain the immense power of the divine light, and they shattered. This event, known as the breaking of the vessels, Shevirat HaKelim, caused the divine light to be scattered and trapped in fragments, or sparks, throughout the lower realms of existence. These fallen sparks became embedded in the shards, kelipat, of the broken vessels. This is the mystical source of all chaos, imbalance, suffering, and spiritual darkness in the world. This is where human consciousness finds its profound and cosmic purpose. Our task as human beings is not simply to achieve personal enlightenment for our own sake. Our primary task is tikkun olam, which means the repair or rectification of the world. We are here on earth to be active partners with God in the work of cosmic restoration. The Kabbalists teach that every time we perform a mitzvah, a commandment or a simple good deed, with focused awareness and pure intention, kavanah, we are not just performing a physical act, we are performing a powerful spiritual one. With our conscious intent, we locate a trapped spark of divine light hidden within the materiality of the world, in food, in relationships, in business, and we elevate it, freeing it from its shell and sending it back to its divine source. Consciousness, therefore, is the primary tool for cosmic repair. It is the light of awareness that has the power to see the divinity hidden within the mundane, to find the sacred within the profane, and to actively participate in healing the primal rift between the spiritual and physical worlds. The Kabbalistic path is one of study, prayer, and mindful action, a journey to awaken the divine structure within our own souls so that we can become conscious agents in the redemption of all creation, a perspective that prepares us now to transition toward the more contemporary and integrative voices that follow. Number 31. Gnosticism. Consciousness as hidden knowledge. As we move from the structured cosmic repair work of Kabbalah, our journey takes us back in time to the early centuries of the Common Era to explore a diverse and fascinating collection of spiritual movements that flourished alongside early Christianity and Judaism. These are known collectively as Gnosticism. The word Gnostic comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge. But this is not ordinary intellectual knowledge. Gnostic refers to a direct, personal, and transformative knowledge of the divine, a secret revelation that awakens the soul from a state of profound slumber. Gnosticism offers a radical and often dramatic reinterpretation of the human condition. At its core is a fundamental dualism. The Gnostics taught that the entire material world, the physical universe we inhabit, is a terrible mistake, a flawed and corrupt prison created not by the true, ultimate God, but by a lesser, ignorant, and often malevolent creator deity they called the Demiurge. This Demiurge, often identified with the God of the Old Testament, foolishly believes he is the one true God, and he has trapped fragments of the divine light within his material creation, specifically within certain human beings. The true God, the ultimate source of all goodness and light, exists in a transcendent spiritual realm far beyond this flawed cosmos. This God is completely alien and unknown to the Demiurge and to the world he rules. Within each of us, or at least within the Gnostics, there is a divine spark, a fragment of this alien God's light that has fallen into the darkness of the material world and become trapped within the prison of the physical body. This spark is our true self, our spirit, but it lies dormant, asleep, and ignorant of its own nature and its sublime origin. It is in a state of amnesia, drugged by the distractions and passions of the material world. Consciousness, in its ordinary state, is therefore a state of profound ignorance. It is a dreamlike stupor, a form of drunkenness, where the divine spirit identifies with its fleshy prison and forgets its true home. Salvation, for the Gnostic, can only come from outside this corrupt system. It comes in the form of a divine messenger, a revealer of Gnosis, who descends from the true, transcendent realm of light. This figure, often identified by Christian Gnostics with Christ, does not come to forgive sins or to die for humanity in a traditional sense. He comes as an awakener. His purpose is to deliver the secret knowledge, the gnosis, that can awaken the sleeping sparks of divinity within humanity. This knowledge is the liberating message that you are not from this world. Your true identity is divine, and your true home is the realm of light. When a person receives this gnosis, their consciousness undergoes a radical transformation. They remember who they truly are. They realize that their body and the entire material world are alien to them. This knowledge is the key that unlocks the prison. The Gnostic path is one of detachment from the world, asceticism, and the study of secret teachings, all designed to purify the soul and prepare it for its eventual escape. Upon the death of the body, the awakened soul, armed with its secret knowledge, can then ascend through the hostile cosmic spheres ruled by the Demiurge's archons, bypass their power, and finally be reunited with its true source in the kingdom of light. This dramatic vision of consciousness as a lost divinity in need of awakening now brings us to a more modern teacher who also speaks of a profound, choiceless form of awareness.
Number 32. Krishnamurti, Choiceless Observation. We now transition from the ancient, mythic cosmologies of Gnosticism to the stark, modern, and fiercely independent voice of the 20th century spiritual teacher, Jiddu Krishnamurti. Raised from a young age by the Theosophical Society to be the next world teacher, Krishnamurti famously dissolved the organization created for him in 1929, declaring that truth is a pathless land and that it cannot be approached by any organization, creed, or authority. For the rest of his life, he traveled the world, engaging in dialogues and giving public talks that offered a radical and uncompromising exploration of the human mind. For Krishnamurti, the entire structure of our ordinary consciousness is built upon a foundation of conflict and fragmentation. Our minds, he said, are conditioned from birth by our culture, our religion, our education, our family, and our personal experiences. This conditioning creates the me, the ego, the center of all our psychological activity. This me is fundamentally a collection of memories, beliefs, fears, desires, and images. It is constantly seeking security, pleasure, and permanence in a world that is inherently insecure and impermanent. This fundamental contradiction
is the source of all human psychological suffering: our fear, our anger, our loneliness, our sorrow. Krishnamurti argued that all our traditional methods for dealing with this suffering are doomed to fail because they operate within the same field of conditioned thought. Our attempts to control our anger, to discipline ourselves, to follow a spiritual path, to achieve a future state of enlightenment, all of these are still actions of the me trying to improve itself or escape from itself. It is the thinker trying to control its own thoughts which only creates more division and conflict. The only way out, he insisted, is a radical and total transformation of consciousness itself. This transformation does not come through effort, discipline, or time. It can only happen through a very specific quality of attention, which he called choiceless awareness or observation without the observer. This is the act of looking at the contents of our own minds, our thoughts, our emotions, our reactions, without any judgment, condemnation, or justification. It is to observe the arising of anger, for example, not as my anger that I must do something about, but simply to observe the energy of anger itself, as it is, without naming it or being entangled in it. In this state of pure high-energy attention, the division between the observer and the observed, the thinker and the thought, dissolves. When you look at your jealousy without the I who is jealous, there is only jealousy. And in that moment of non-dualistic observation, the energy of jealousy reveals its entire structure and withers away, not through suppression, but through being fully seen. For Krishnamurti, this choiceless observation is the key that unlocks the prison of the conditioned mind. Consciousness, free from the known, free from the past, becomes something entirely different. It is no longer a cluttered storehouse of memory, but a fresh, living, and intelligent emptiness, capable of perceiving truth directly, moment to moment. This emphasis on a state of pure, present-moment awareness provides a powerful link to our next voice, a contemporary spiritual teacher who has brought the idea of presence to millions around the world.
Number 33. Eckhart Tolle, Presence and Stillness. From the fiercely intellectual and deconstructive inquiry of Krishnamurti, our journey now flows into the gentle, accessible, and deeply practical teachings of Eckhart Tolle, a contemporary spiritual teacher whose work has resonated with millions globally. While Krishnamurti emphasized a rigorous observation to dismantle the self, Tolle's approach centers on a simple yet profound shift of consciousness, a movement out of the incessant stream of thinking and into the direct, felt experience of the present moment. Tolle's core teaching begins with an analysis of what he calls the egoic mind. Much like Krishnamurti, he sees the ordinary state of human consciousness as being one of complete identification with the thinking mind. This egoic mind is a conditioned, compulsive, and largely unconscious stream of thought that is constantly judging, interpreting, and labeling reality. Its entire sense of self is derived from the past, our memories, our life story, our grievances, and it is perpetually projecting itself into the future, seeking fulfillment, security, or happiness there. Because of this, the egoic mind is almost completely incapable of being in the present moment. The now is seen merely as a means to an end, an obstacle to be overcome on the way to a more important future. This, Tolle argues, is the root of all human dysfunction and suffering. It is a state of psychological disease, or dis-ease, caused by our resistance to what is. The way out of this suffering is not to fight the mind or to try and figure out our problems on the level of thought. The way out is to disidentify from the thinking mind altogether. Tolle points to a deeper dimension of consciousness that lies beneath the surface noise of thought. This dimension he calls presence or stillness. It is the silent, formless awareness that is the witness of our thoughts and emotions.
He often invites his readers and listeners to perform a simple experiment, to ask themselves, I wonder what my next thought will be, and to wait for it with alert attention. In that moment of waiting, there is a gap in the stream of thought, a moment of pure, silent awareness. This, he says, is a glimpse of presence. The practice, then, is to bring this quality of present moment awareness into our everyday lives as much as possible. This can be done by feeling the inner body, the aliveness and energy field within our hands, feet, and entire body. It can be done by paying full attention to our senses, truly seeing the flower, truly hearing the bird, truly feeling the water on our skin, without the mind's immediate commentary. It can be done by simply accepting and allowing the present moment to be exactly as it is, without resisting it internally. When we are able to step into this state of presence, we realize that we are not our thoughts, our life story, or our emotional pain, which he calls the pain body. We realize that our true identity is the timeless, formless consciousness that is aware of all those things. This is the liberation he speaks of in The Power of Now. Consciousness is not something to be developed or achieved. It is something to be discovered, a silent, peaceful space that has been here all along, obscured by the noise of the mind. This idea of a fundamental, formless awareness as our true nature finds an even more direct and uncompromising expression in the teachings of our next contemporary voice.
Number 34. Rupert Spira. Awareness is all that is. Our journey now deepens, moving from Eckhart Tolle's accessible invitation into the stillness of the present moment to the clear, precise, and uncompromising teachings of the British spiritual teacher and artist Rupert Spira. Spira's work represents a modern expression of the direct path, a method of self-inquiry rooted in the ancient traditions of Advaita Vedanta and Kashmiri Shaivism. He guides his students not toward a future state of enlightenment, but toward an immediate and direct recognition of the fundamental nature of their own consciousness, right here and now. Spira begins by inviting us to investigate our most basic and intimate experience, the experience of being aware. He asks us to consider what it is that is aware of these words, aware of our thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. We find that all these things, thoughts, feelings, sensations, are constantly changing. They appear, stay for a while, and then disappear. But the awareness in which they appear does not itself change. It is the constant, stable, ever-present background upon which the entire movie of our life unfolds. We are so accustomed to being fascinated by the content of our experience, the drama of our thoughts, the intensity of our emotions, that we completely overlook the screen upon which it is all projected. The next step in this inquiry is to investigate the nature of this awareness itself. We find that it has no observable qualities. It has no color, no shape, no size, no location. It is completely transparent, empty, and formless. And yet, we cannot deny its existence, because we need it in order to be aware of anything at all. It is the one thing in our experience that we can never stand apart from to observe as an object, because it is the very subject that is doing the observing. It is our fundamental self. Having established this, Spira then leads us to the most radical and profound recognition. He asks, is there any evidence that this awareness we find at the core of our being is limited to our individual body or mind? Do you ever experience a border or an edge to your awareness? We find that we do not. We only experience the limits of what we are aware of, not a limit of awareness itself. The conclusion for Spira is that there is only one, single, infinite, and indivisible consciousness. What we call my awareness and what we call your awareness are not two different awarenesses. They are the same, single, universal awareness looking out through two different sets of eyes, experiencing itself from two different points of view. The final step is the realization that this awareness is all that there is. Everything we experience, the body, the mind, the world, is not separate from awareness, but is a modulation or an appearance within awareness. Just as a dream character and a dream landscape are not made of anything other than the dreamer's own mind, the entire universe is not made of anything other than this one, infinite consciousness. This is the direct experience of non-duality. Consciousness is not just the witness of reality, it is the very substance and fabric of reality itself. This powerful, idealistic vision stands in stark contrast to the views of mainstream science, a conflict that our next thinker has spent his career exploring. Number 35. Donald Hoffman, Consciousness Creates Reality. From the profound spiritual and introspective claim that consciousness is the ultimate ground of reality, our journey now takes a startling turn, arriving at the forefront of contemporary cognitive science, where we find a scientist making a strikingly similar claim, but one arrived at through the rigorous logic of mathematics and evolutionary game theory. We meet Donald Hoffman, a cognitive scientist at the University of California, Irvine, whose work presents a radical and deeply counterintuitive challenge to our most basic assumptions about the world. Hoffman's central argument begins with a simple question: has evolution shaped our senses to perceive reality as it truly is? The almost universal assumption, both in science and in everyday life, is yes. We believe our eyes, ears, and hands are windows onto an objective, pre-existing physical world. Hoffman argues that this assumption is profoundly and demonstrably false. Using evolutionary game theory, he has run countless computer simulations to pit virtual creatures that see reality as it is against creatures that see a simplified, user-friendly interface. In simulation after simulation, the creatures whose senses have been shaped to see reality die out. The creatures that sacrifice truth for utility, the ones that see a simplified, icon-based reality, are the ones that survive and reproduce. He uses the powerful analogy of a desktop interface on a computer. When you see a blue rectangular icon for a file on your screen, you know that the file itself is not actually blue or rectangular. The file is a complex array of magnetic fields and voltages in the circuits of your computer. The icon is not meant to show you the truth. It is designed to hide the truth and provide you with a simple, useful symbol that allows you to interact with the complex reality of the computer effectively. The icon is a useful fiction. Hoffman argues that our perception of the entire physical world is exactly like this. Space and time themselves, and all the objects we see within them, tables, chairs, trees, even the moon and the stars, are not the objective reality. They are our species-specific desktop interface. They are the icons that evolution has given us to navigate a reality that is far too complex for us to handle directly. Physical objects are merely symbols that prompt us to behave in ways that promote our survival. So, if the physical world is not the fundamental reality, what is? Hoffman's astonishing conclusion, which he calls conscious realism, is that the true objective reality consists of a vast, interacting network of conscious agents. Consciousness itself is the fundamental, irreducible nature of reality. What we experience as a physical world is merely our simplified, iconic representation of this complex social network of conscious agents. Your brain is not a mysterious machine that somehow creates consciousness. Rather, what you experience as a physical brain is just a simplified icon, a symbol within your own conscious interface that represents a certain complex system of conscious agents. This radical theory turns the traditional scientific worldview completely on its head. It suggests that consciousness does not arise from matter. Rather, the entire physical world as we perceive it arises from consciousness. It is a view that, while born from mathematics and science,
brings us remarkably close to the ancient idealistic philosophies we have already explored, and it sets the stage for a deep questioning of free will itself.
Number 36. Sam Harris. Consciousness without free will. Our journey now pivots from the radical idealism of Donald Hoffman, who argues that consciousness constitutes the fundamental reality, to the equally challenging perspective of the neuroscientist, philosopher, and author Sam Harris. Harris is a prominent materialist who firmly believes that consciousness is a product of the brain, a process rooted in the physical world. However, his work leads to a conclusion that many find just as unsettling as Hoffman's: the deeply ingrained and cherished feeling that we are the conscious authors of our own thoughts and actions is a profound and demonstrable illusion. Harris's argument against free will is direct and based on a combination of neuroscience and careful introspection. From a neuroscientific perspective, he points to experiments, beginning with those of Benjamin Libet in the 1980s, which have shown that the brain activity corresponding to a decision can be detected several hundred milliseconds or even seconds before the person becomes consciously aware of having made the decision. This suggests that what feels like a conscious choice is actually the final neurological outcome of unconscious processes that were set in motion long before. The conscious feeling of deciding is an afterthought, a report on a decision that the brain has already made. But Harris argues that we don't even need neuroscience to see this. We can discover the illusion of free will for ourselves through careful and honest introspection. He invites us to simply pay attention to the arising of our own thoughts. Try to decide what you are going to think next. You will find that you cannot. Thoughts simply appear in consciousness, as if from nowhere. You did not create them. They are gifted to you by a complex web of prior causes: your genes, your upbringing, your past experiences, the current state of your nervous system, none of which you chose. The same is true for our intentions and actions. The intention to pick up a glass of water simply arises in the mind. You did not choose to have that intention. You can become aware of the intention and you can be aware of the action, but the ultimate source of the intention remains a complete mystery, hidden in the darkness of your unconscious neural processing. The feeling that I am the one in control, the conscious agent at the helm of my mind, is a powerful illusion. So what is consciousness for Harris? It is the space in which this show of thoughts, feelings, and intentions appear. It is the field of experience. But it is not a doer. It is a witness. Consciousness is the capacity to experience the unfolding of a life, but it is not the author of that unfolding. This conclusion, he argues, is not a cause for despair or nihilism. On the contrary, letting go of the illusion of free will can be profoundly liberating. It can diminish feelings of pride and arrogance as we recognize that our successes are not entirely our own doing. It can foster greater compassion and forgiveness for others as we understand that people who do terrible things are, in a deep sense, victims of their own biology and history. And spiritually, it can lead to a deeper sense of freedom, the freedom that comes from no longer identifying with the chaotic and often unpleasant stream of thoughts that pass through the mind. It is a freedom from the burden of being the thinker. This idea of a self that is an illusion created by the mind is a theme we will now explore from another powerful contemporary perspective. Number 37. Susan Blackmore, The Illusion of a Self. Continuing our exploration into the profound challenge to our sense of self, we now turn to the work of the British psychologist, writer, and lecturer Susan Blackmore. A dedicated practitioner of Zen meditation and a rigorous scientific skeptic, Blackmore has spent her career investigating the nature of consciousness and has arrived at a conclusion that is both deeply aligned with ancient Buddhist teachings and grounded in modern cognitive science. The self we feel ourselves to be is not a real entity, but a compelling and persistent illusion. Blackmore's journey began with a dramatic out-of-body experience as a student at Oxford, an event that propelled her to search for a scientific explanation for such phenomena. This quest ultimately led her to a deep investigation of consciousness and a rejection of any paranormal or dualistic explanations. Instead, she argues that our entire mental world, including our sense of being a continuous I, can be understood as a product of complex brain processes. She powerfully challenges the intuitive idea that there is a single, continuous stream of consciousness, as William James described it. Through careful introspection and an examination of psychological experiments, she argues that what we actually have are multiple, parallel, and often fleeting moments of awareness. The idea that these are all woven together into a single, rich, and continuous stream is a fiction that the brain constructs in retrospect. She calls this the illusion of conscious continuity. At the heart of this illusion is the construction of a self. Blackmore argues that the self is a grand delusion. It is a story, a narrative that our brain, with its powerful language capabilities, spins to make sense of its own actions and the world around it. She introduces the concept of memes, a term coined by Richard Dawkins to help explain this. A meme is an idea, behavior, or style that spreads from person to person within a culture. Blackmore suggests that the self is the ultimate meme complex, or selfplex. It is a vast collection of interconnected ideas, beliefs, and habits. The idea of my name, my body, my memories, my beliefs, that have successfully replicated themselves in our brains because they are useful for survival and social interaction. This selfplex creates a powerful illusion of a central agent, a me, who is in control, who is having experiences, and who is making decisions. In reality, there is just a brain and a body, responding to the environment, with the story of me being generated alongside the action, not causing it. Consciousness in this view is not the property of a self. There is no little person inside the head having the conscious experiences. Rather, consciousness is simply what it is like to be a particular bundle of brain activity at a particular moment. There is experience, but there is no single enduring experiencer. Blackmore's conclusion is radical and deeply resonates with Zen Buddhism. The path to freedom and clarity lies in seeing through this illusion. Through practices like meditation, we can train the mind to pay close attention to experience as it actually is, moment by moment. In doing so, we can begin to see that the feeling of a permanent self is just another thought, another sensation that arises and passes away in consciousness. The goal is to unhook from this powerful illusion, to live a life free from the anxieties and attachments of a fictional self, a theme that our next thinker expands upon, proposing that consciousness itself, not brains, is the fundamental reality. Number 38. Bernardo Kastrup, Consciousness as the Ground of Reality. Our journey now arrives at a figure who mounts one of the most rigorous and philosophically sophisticated challenges to the dominant scientific worldview of materialism. We meet the Dutch computer scientist and philosopher Bernardo Kastrup, a vocal and powerful advocate for a position known as analytical idealism. While thinkers like Dennett and Blackmore argue that consciousness is an illusion generated by complex brain matter, Kastrup flips this entire paradigm on its head. He argues, with logical force, that it is the material world that is the illusion, and that consciousness is the one and only fundamental reality. Kastrup's argument begins by pointing out that the only thing any of us truly knows to exist is consciousness itself. All our knowledge of a so-called outside world, the world of tables, chairs, planets, and even our own brains, is an inference. We don't experience the world directly. We experience our own perceptions. The redness of an apple, the hardness of a table, the warmth of the sun, these are all qualities of our conscious experience. The entire world of science, with its measurements of mass, charge, and momentum, is a set of observations that occur within consciousness.
To then claim that the brain, an object we only know through our conscious perception of it, somehow creates the very consciousness through which we perceive it, is for Kastrup a dizzying circular argument. It puts the map before the territory. Instead, he proposes a more parsimonious and logical alternative. Let us start with what we know for sure. Consciousness exists. What if that is all there is? He posits that there is only one universal, fundamental consciousness. The entire universe is a process, a set of phenomenal appearances within this one mind. So why do we feel like separate individual beings? Kastrup uses a powerful metaphor from nature. He asks us to imagine that this one universal consciousness is like a stream of water. An individual person, like you or me, is like a small whirlpool that forms within that stream. This whirlpool has its own localized identity, its own center, and it experiences itself as separate from the rest of the stream. But what is the whirlpool made of? It is made of nothing but the stream itself. It is simply a localized pattern of excitation, a self-sustaining loop within the one consciousness. Our individual psyche, with its thoughts, memories, and sense of self, is a dissociative alter of this universal mind. Much like a person with dissociative identity disorder can have multiple, distinct personalities within one brain. Our bodies are simply the extrinsic appearance, the image of this whirlpool of consciousness as seen from an outside perspective. That is, from the perspective of another whirlpool. The brain does not generate consciousness. The brain is what a process of localized, dissociated consciousness looks like. When we die, the whirlpool dissolves, and the consciousness that was localized within it simply returns to the boundless stream of universal consciousness. This idealistic view elegantly solves the hard problem of consciousness, because there is no problem of how matter creates mind. Mind is all there is. It also explains why the universe appears to be fine-tuned for life and governed by mathematical laws, because it is the manifestation of a unified, intelligent mind. Kastrup's work challenges us to reconsider our most basic assumptions, and it sets the stage perfectly for the next step in our journey, where we confront the ever-advancing world of artificial intelligence.
Number 39. AI and machine consciousness. Can it be simulated? Our journey through the vast landscape of the mind now arrives at the cutting edge of our own time, a place of immense technological promise and profound philosophical anxiety. We confront the question of artificial intelligence and the possibility of machine consciousness. Having explored theories where consciousness is a biological process, a user illusion, or the very ground of reality, we must now ask, can we build it? Can we create a conscious entity out of silicon and code? This question forces us to synthesize everything we have explored. The debate splits largely into three camps, which mirror the philosophical positions we have seen. The first camp is that of the strong AI proponents and computationalists. Following in the tradition of functionalism, they argue that consciousness is not about the specific stuff something is made of, whether it's carbon-based neurons or silicon-based transistors, but about what it does. Consciousness is a form of information processing. If we can create a computer program that can perfectly replicate all the functional processes of the human brain, its ability to learn, to reason, to use language, to model its own states, then that program will, by definition, be conscious. For thinkers in this camp, consciousness is a very sophisticated kind of software. The challenge is immense, requiring us to reverse engineer the brain's code. But there is no fundamental barrier. A sufficiently complex simulation of a mind is a mind. The second camp argues passionately against this conclusion. Following thinkers like John Searle, they insist that consciousness is an emergent biological property. It is something that brains do, and it is intrinsically tied to the specific, messy wetware of our neurochemistry. A computer, no matter how powerful, is just running a simulation. Searle's Chinese room argument holds firm. The machine can manipulate symbols with incredible speed and accuracy, giving the perfect illusion of understanding, but it will never have genuine semantic understanding or subjective, first-person awareness. It has the syntax but not the semantics, the calculation but not the feeling. A computer can simulate a hurricane down to the last water molecule, but the inside of the computer will not get wet. Similarly, a simulation of consciousness will never actually feel like anything. The third camp, following idealists like Bernardo Kastrup, offers a different kind of no. They argue that the entire project is based on a category error. We are trying to build consciousness within a framework of materialism, but materialism itself is a theory that arises within consciousness. It's like a character in your dream trying to build a machine that can dream. From this perspective, a machine, as an object in the world, is an appearance in consciousness. It can never be consciousness itself. A whirlpool can never create the stream. It is an expression of the stream. Therefore, an AI could become an incredibly complex and intelligent whirlpool, a new dissociated alter within universal mind. But it would not be a case of matter creating consciousness. Rather, it would be a new manifestation of the one consciousness that underlies all things. Today, with the rise of large language models and other generative AI, this debate is no longer academic. We are creating systems that can master human language and generate art with breathtaking skill, forcing us to ask with new urgency, what is the difference between simulated intelligence and genuine awareness? What ethical responsibilities would we have to a machine if we believed could suffer? As we stand at this technological precipice, our journey of exploration takes its final and most important turn, away from all theories and all external systems and back to the one place where consciousness is undeniably and immediately present. Number 40. You, the consciousness that is listening now. We have journeyed across millennia and continents, through the minds of sages, philosophers, mystics, and scientists. We have explored consciousness as a universal ocean of being, a selfless and dynamic stream, an immortal soul, a biological process, a computational illusion, and the very ground of reality. We have listened to 40 different voices, 40 different perspectives on the greatest mystery of existence. And now, our journey arrives at its final and most essential destination. It arrives here, in this very moment. It arrives at you. Not the you of your name, your history, your memories, or your identity. Not the you that is a collection of roles and responsibilities, but the more fundamental you, the consciousness that is aware of this voice right now. The silent, knowing presence in which these words are appearing and disappearing. Throughout this entire exploration, this consciousness has been the one constant, the silent, invisible thread connecting every idea and every perspective. It was this consciousness that imagined itself as a Hindu sage, realizing the unity of Atman and Brahman. It was this consciousness that followed the Buddha in observing the selfless flow of perception. It was this consciousness that felt the logical force of Descartes' "I think, therefore I am." It was this consciousness that pictured the intricate dance of neurons and the vast web of an AI. Every theory, every concept, every argument has been nothing more than a pattern, a vibration, a temporary shape appearing within you, the aware space. You are not the theories. You are the awareness in which all theories are known. You are not the story. You are the space in which the story is told. Philosophers can debate whether a philosophical zombie is possible, but you are the undeniable refutation of that possibility. You know with a certainty that precedes all logic and all science that you are not a zombie. You know there is something it is like to be you. This direct, immediate, self-evident knowing of your own being is the ultimate ground truth, the starting point for every other inquiry. So the final question of our journey is not a theoretical one. It is an invitation to simply rest for a moment as this awareness, without trying to define it, without trying to grasp it, without trying to reconcile the 40 voices we have heard. Simply notice the awareness itself. Notice the stillness that is effortlessly present behind the sound of these words and the movement of your thoughts. Notice the open, empty, and accommodating space of your own consciousness, a space that allows every experience, joyful or painful, brilliant or confusing, to arise, be known, and pass away without leaving a single trace upon itself. This consciousness is not a distant goal to be achieved or a complex problem to be solved. It is the most simple, intimate, and immediate reality of your experience. It is the light by which you have seen this entire journey. It is the consciousness that is listening and knows that it is listening right now.